Chapter 414. Saint Lorraine was as quiet as ever. The night breeze of early winter blew across the heavily guarded palace, and the cold wave was filtered by the warm current. However, in the meeting room next to the throne, the black-haired young man could still feel an inexplicable chill. Slowly digesting John's words, the black-haired young man's face gradually stiffened. Grandpa John, the so-called angelization is... The white-haired old man roughly explained to Luoya the principles and difficulties of the bloodline promotion of the Heathcliff family, as well as the contradiction of power in Xia. Angels were the right-hand men of Xia in ancient times. Their power could be said to be worthy of the title of God. Now, countless years later, although Heathcliff had become the manager of the Vatican with the bloodline left behind by Xia, he had never stopped exploring his own power. At that time, Heathcliff thought that the power of angels was a huge treasure that could be exploited infinitely. However, with the accumulation of related spells and secret techniques, the family's development of the bloodline gradually matured, and the huge hidden danger began to gradually reveal itself, which is the irreversible reaction of angelization. Angelization sounded like the ultimate form of the angelic bloodline, and in fact it was true in terms of bloodline purity. Unfortunately, this so-called angelization did not mean becoming an omniscient and omnipotent god, nor was it becoming an ancient messenger of Xia. It was a runaway power. Divinity. The white-haired old man sighed and told the young man what happened when Luoya was not around. In fact, not long after Nuwa Iyer arrived at St. Lorraine for treatment, an accident happened that outsiders did not know about. The bloodline power in the girl's body broke through the limit, causing a short period of angelization and a runaway power. Nuwa Iyer has gone to Tuck Fortress. That's right. The angelization of the atavistic bloodline is much more serious than I thought. However, the suppression effect is limited, and it must be vented to a certain extent. Only the mutants can bear such a task. After hearing John's explanation, the young man finally understood why there were no letters from Nuwa Iyer for so long. Obviously, the most suitable place to deal with this kind of impulsive killing was the battlefield, especially the battlefield of the mutants. If it was a war between humans, cruel killings would often bring shame. For Nuwa Iyer, the future successor of the Vatican, the importance of reputation was self-evident. It would be a big problem if she accidentally killed a surrendered soldier. In fact, there was no one in the world who knew Nuwa Iyer's bloodlust better than Luoya. In the recorder's eye, one of the scenes that left the deepest impression on Luoya was Nuwa Iyer's murderous smile when she stood on top of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. In the past, Luoya meant that Nuwa Iyer's personality was the reason. But now that he thought about it, it was actually wrong. But unlike the game, Nuwa Iyer's situation in reality was much worse. Not only did her extraordinary power improve faster, but her bloodline upgrade was also brought forward. Under the influence of these two factors, to what extent would her runaway power reach? Actually, Nuwa Iyer told me not to tell you before she left. But as her elder, I naturally have to consider her safety first. That's why I called you here. Well, this is a request from Heathcliff. I hope you can go to Tuck Fortress. In the room, the white-haired old man's voice was calm but solemn as he made the request. Luoya couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. Luoya was shocked by the white-haired old man's words for a moment. He reflexively wanted to agree, but when the words came to his mouth, he had doubts in his heart. Well, there is indeed such a possibility. But even so, I still hope that you can go and see her, because you are the anchor in her heart. Yes, the way to resist the angelization is to vent one's power and consume one's divinity. On the other hand, it is to strengthen one's humanity. You are special to that child. You are the anchor that holds on to oneself and stabilizes her spirit. Of course, Kai-in is also one of the anchors of Nuwa Iyer. That's why I asked her to go to Tuck Fortress. I see. I understand. Luoya thought for a moment and sorted out the situation. He then opened his mouth and agreed to go to Tuck Fortress. The white-haired old man was relieved to see this and told the young man about the following arrangements. Because the matter of Nuwa Iyer's bloodline upgrade was still a secret, Luoya's departure naturally couldn't be made public. For this point, Holy See John adopted the old method, which was to let the most trusted inquisitors take on the task of escorting Luoya. Of course, Luoya's own guards could also follow. Grandpa John, did something unpleasant happen between Count Hanks and the Akate family? I always feel that he is a little wary of me. Is that so? I understand. I'm afraid the atmosphere of this trip won't be too good. Nuwa Iyer was one of the rare atavistic bloodlines in Heath Crete. From the moment he was born, the growth of his extraordinary power had been carefully deduced in order to prevent any accidents. The bloodline upgrade, which could endanger his life, was of the utmost importance. In fact, when he was young, the Vatican's prediction of Nuwa Iyer's growth had always been accurate until the age of 9, when Nuwa Iyer met Luoya. There was no doubt that this change must have something to do with Luoya. However, whether it was the bloodline of the Akate family that promoted Nuwa Iyer's growth, or whether it was the encounter between Luoya and Nuwa Iyer that changed something, Holy See John wasn't sure. However, there was one thing that the old man knew very well. May Shia bless you. Going to the front line was a major event. Even if he wasn't going to the battlefield, he still needed to report to his family. Most importantly, according to the journey to the eastern region, plus the time spent with Nuwa Iyer, he estimated that he would only be back next year. According to Kadia's letter, although the Eric family couldn't raise their heads in front of the alliance between Akate and Heath Crete, they were still very active behind the scenes. In the end, they were just waiting for an opportunity. Now that Nuwa Iyer's situation was so unstable, no one knew if the Eric family would take the opportunity to do something. It was necessary to be vigilant, but it was a little awkward for Luoya to set off now because not only Nuwa Iyer was about to upgrade his bloodline, but the boy was also in a state of waiting for a breakthrough. The 3 pagan leaders, including Cynthia, felt that Luoya's behavior was very inappropriate. They all said that it was too risky. After all, the difficulty of upgrading from Source Level 4 to Source Level 3 was no less than the difficulty of upgrading Nuwa Iyer to Golden Bloodline. How could he be unprepared? But if it was Luoya who was here, why would he want to break through on the carriage? Wasn't this the same as raising an antenna? Was he afraid that he wouldn't die fast enough? After some consideration, the worried Rodney, Wood, and Cynthia jointly came forward to advise Luoya. Wood, who was the oldest, said these words carefully. He wanted Luoya to think about it again, but the boy's attitude was very firm this time. In this case, the conditions for Luoya to break through were actually the same. The boy had a vague hunch that this journey might not be as smooth as he imagined. Guards and so on were external factors. The right thing to do was to increase his strength as soon as possible. 200 years after the Gemini War, there were no longer any pagans among the targets of the Inquisition. However, in the Code of the Holy See, pagans were not granted legitimacy. They were in a gray state. In the eyes of most of the inquisitors, pagans were not bad people, but they were definitely not good people. Count, I know that you are wary of me and don't trust my warriors. But I want to remind you that the place we are going to next does not distinguish between Shia believers and pagans. It is only divided between humans and non-humans. In this case, I think we should seek common ground and put aside our differences. Yes, although our beliefs are different, our warriors are not completely without similarities. They desire for a safe journey, to avoid fighting alone, to take turns to preserve their fighting strength, and finally, to arrive at Tark Fortress smoothly. These are the common interests of both of us. For this interest, I think we can temporarily put aside the differences in living habits, beliefs, and customs. I understand. Seek common ground and put aside our differences. That is indeed the case. A week after meeting with the Holy See, a mixed team silently left St. Lorraine in the night. Looking back at the tall city of angels, Luoya's mind flashed with the beautiful figure of the blonde girl. While missing her, he silently made a promise. The next time I return, I will bring her back. I will. Chapter 4:15. A month later, in the eastern region of St. Maester, a well-trained team was slowly moving forward on a snowy winter road. Inside a wide carriage, a black-haired boy was reading a book, while opposite him, a red-haired man was resting with his eyes closed. The interior of the carriage was spacious, but it wasn't exquisite. It couldn't be compared to the carriage Luoya used when he was in Akat's house, let alone the Sorofia family's jewel necklace team. But this kind of carriage often had several people on it, making it vibrate as if many people were exercising. The reason was very simple, because this wide carriage with tables, chairs, and bookcases was the command center of Luoya's team. Overall, this journey wasn't peaceful. First of all, Kadia had once explained to Luoya about the situation. They couldn't find the road. Why didn't they build a more durable and more efficient brick road? This matter was actually very easy to understand. To put it bluntly, the amount of work was too large, and they didn't have the money and time. The most important thing was that there were no merchants passing by, so there was no profit. Moreover, if the road was repaired, it would be easier for humans to travel, and it would be easier for the mutants to travel. Originally, if they broke through the barrier, they could still trade distance for time, but if the road was repaired, then the devils would directly enter the village. Whether it was summer rain or winter snow, the traces of the road would be temporarily erased, and even in autumn, the foot-deep fallen leaves would make it difficult to distinguish the road. 1 second to remember. Trace detector. Price, 50,000 points. Regarding Luoya's foresight, Hanks and the others from the Inquisition felt ashamed, but no one thought that this was just the beginning. The monsters in the eastern region weren't afraid of humans, and they were fierce. Once they set their eyes on their prey, they would follow them for a long time. For more than a week, Luoya and the others almost didn't have a good night's sleep. There were 6-legged bloodthirsty deer, 2-faced hyenas, and all kinds of strange monsters rushed out at night and fought with the human team in the dark. The Perseverance Church had been traveling outside for many years as mercenaries, while the Power Church had been forced to become barbarians in the mountains. Both sides had rich experience in field battles, and were very good at dealing with demons. The judges' team had rich experience in fighting against humans. It was after the Heresy Army and the Inquisitors had worked together to survive another night of being attacked by magical creatures. In the morning, the team was moving forward in laughter and relaxation. They sent out a small team to explore the canyon ahead, only to be suddenly ambushed. Just like that, the mutants suddenly appeared in front of Luoya's team. Their average strength was around Origin Rank 5. Their bodies were white and green, and their faces were similar to humans, but slightly different. They had protruding teeth, sparse hair, and a ferocious appearance. After seeing the corpses of the mutants, even the solemn and silent Hanks changed his expression, showing a natural fear towards humanoid creatures. However, Luoya was rather calm, because he had seen similar scenes before. Why are you panicking? They'll die if they're killed. What's there to be afraid of? In terms of body structure, they were basically the same as ordinary humans. They knew how to ambush and use weapons, which meant that they had intelligence. However, they didn't retreat after attacking for a long time, which meant that their intelligence wasn't high. During the battle, Luoya heard strange cries, which should be the language of the mutants. From this, it could be seen that they had the ability to communicate. The sudden attack of the mutants was unexpected, but it also rang the alarm bell for Luoya and the others, making the following situation complicated and confusing in everyone's eyes. It also made everyone understand that this wasn't the gentle home of humans at the back, but the front line full of foreign enemies. The whole team was further united because of this. Chapter 416. In the command room of Tucker Fortress, a blond middle-aged man looked at the plains outside the window without saying a word. Behind him, men and women in the holy white robes of the Vatican stood in a row. It was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Only the whistling of the night wind conveyed the fact that time was still passing. Where is Nuair now? As the person in charge of a department in the Holy See, Catherine had never been so cautious before. Wherever she went, she was always authoritative and stern. However, this shrewd and capable woman actually smiled apologetically. Unfortunately, her words didn't manage to ease the man's emotions. She was also very clear about the reason why. When this decision was announced, the bishops of the right department heaved a sigh of relief. After all, for them who had not experienced clinical treatment for a long time, the little princess's angelization came too quickly. It was completely beyond their original expectations. But as long as they went to Tucker Fortress, they believed that everything would be fine. But unfortunately, the plan was perfect, but the change was even more unexpected. Today she has been out for nearly 10 hours. This is far beyond the time limit of my past. Bishop Catherine, can you explain why my daughter's condition is still not improving? Lord Cain, Her Highness has the bloodline of the atavistic bloodline, so the situation is different from yours. In fact, the number of enemies killed by Her Highness is twice as many as yours. The blond man's face turned ugly as he slammed his hand on the table. The sound was heard, and the bishops were silent. Even Catherine's body trembled. Angelization was a battle between humanity and divinity. It was also the riskiest promotion in the Heathcrete family. If they were defeated in this battle, the degree of deification would exceed the limit, and the final result would be that they would not be able to return. The terrifying consequences sent chills down their spines. But after thinking for a moment, Catherine still stood up and insisted. Then what are you going to do? Are you going to let her soak in that damn ice lake for a year? What's going on? Did I say something wrong? Lord Cain, in fact, the ice lake's effect on Her Highness is very limited. It can only stop the erosion of divinity. It has no healing effect. His Highness' condition did improve today, but it wasn't because of the ice lake. It was because of the letter. After muttering to himself, the blond man couldn't help but widen his eyes. Then, he suddenly remembered one of the letters sent from the Holy Capital. Today's improvement is because of the letter? My lord, with Her Highness' current situation, we feel that her own will would be more effective than a massacre. For example, your company and letters from the people she cares about. After hearing the expert's suggestion, Prince Cain raised his head and looked ahead. He recalled Luoya's message and said resolutely, "That's right." After a month of traveling through forests and mountains, Luoya's team finally entered the plains. Their line of sight, which had been blocked for a long time, was liberated. It also let everyone see the uncanny workmanship of nature and the ability of human beings to change nature. Tucker Fortress, the destination of Luoya's team, finally appeared in front of everyone's eyes after a month of arduous trekking. It also made everyone who was about to reach their destination excited. In ancient times, Wang Yimei quenched her thirst, and today, Wang Yimei ran away. After a few days of continuous marching, Luoya's team received a second surprise. That was, someone came to welcome them. Or rather, someone came to welcome him. The knight regiment that came from afar stood by the roadside. The commander of the regiment stepped forward and respectfully handed over a letter. John of the Holy See clearly supported the relationship between Luoya and Nuar. However, as a father, Cain was slightly more stubborn. Although he was good to Luoya, it was absolutely not to the extent of sending someone to welcome him. Strictly speaking, this letter was a request for help from Cain. The content was also very simple. It was to ask Luoya to hurry to the fortress as soon as possible to maintain Nua's consciousness. After reading the entire letter, the youth's heart became anxious. Because when Luoya read the letter, Nuar had already entered the peak period. Thinking of this, the youth didn't delay any time. After entrusting the command of the pagan army to Hanks, he immediately set off and followed the knight regiment towards Tucker Fortress. The worried youth hastened his horse. However, in the distant Tucker Fortress, boundless fog gradually rose without anyone noticing. It started to drown everything like a tide. Chapter 417. My lord, today it's almost time to rest. Riding at full speed, the armored commander pondered for a long time before he came up to Luoya and suggested. The black-haired boy was silent for a moment. Then he looked back at the tired soldiers behind him, and then looked at the sky that was already dark, and his face showed a hesitant look. But this kind of rapid march also had a price. For example, although the people were fine, but the horse under Luoya was already somewhat unable to hold on, not to mention now the sun had already set. Marching at night was already dangerous, and in the east where the mutants were active it was a big taboo. How long until we arrive? Can't get in? So it's like this. Since they couldn't get in, then they might as well rest for a night to adjust their state. After all, they were afraid that they would be busy later. At this time, Nuar needed Luoya's help, which was equivalent to saying that the boy was one of her spiritual pillars. To be able to be respected by thousands of people in the future, As a man, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't happy, but Luoya couldn't just be happy, because recently he thought of something. In his previous life, the boy was attracted by Luoya's character, so he played the game's common line, and didn't play the female protagonist's individual branches. But Luoya vaguely remembered that when he browsed the forum, some spoiler posts did say that the female protagonists would encounter danger in the individual branches. For this question, Luoya thought for a long time, and he had some answers in his heart. The external threat of the Eric family was indeed affected by Luoya's action, and stopped the rebellion. This influence was good, but Nua Ayer's bloodline promotion in reality was advanced after she came in contact with Luoya. This was a bad thing, and the crisis caused by this would be worse than the original work. Because of his thoughts, Luoya was silent all the way, and the night regiment slowed down in the afterglow of the setting sun. The accompanying knights were relieved that they could have a place to rest today. After 2 hours, the team arrived at a town attached to Tuck Fortress. As the largest resource distribution center and resting place behind Tark Fortress, Banktown had plenty of food and other resources. As a result, it was often attacked by the mutants who crossed over the mountains. There was a sizable garrison in the town for protection, and there was even a market for military merchants. In this desolate land far away from the theocracy, Luoya, the champion of the Challengers Cup and the number one of the younger generation, had not yet spread here, but the surname of Akot played a big role. Although Banktown was close to Tuck Fortress, strictly speaking, it was the territory of Ka Dia, the chief logistics commander. When Mayor Carmen found that the only son of his superior suddenly appeared at the gate, he was very excited. He prepared a sumptuous dinner for Luoya and the others. The black-haired youth did not expect that he could get preferential treatment because of Ka Dia's name, but he accepted Carmen's kindness. Thinking of this, Luoya told Mayor Carmen about Ka Dia's situation, and the logistics officer also made a suggestion after learning about Luoya's itinerary. Fog. The man holding the wine glass sighed at the impermanence of the weather. Luoya smiled and did not care. After dinner, the group returned to the hotel, and Luoya slept on a proper bed again after more than a month. At midnight, when the moonlight was covered by dark clouds, a violent tremor suddenly spread out from the depths of the youth's soul, making the sleeping Luoya suddenly open his eyes and instantly wake up, and then suddenly change color. The crown stone was trembling. Chapter 418. Before going to sleep tonight, Luoya thought that he could have a good night's rest, but things didn't go as he wished. In his sleep, Luoya had a vague feeling. It was as if something in the deepest part of his body was resisting something from the outside world. It constantly overflowed with curse power, covering the surroundings as if it was protecting itself. Then a beautiful, familiar, and frightening figure flashed in his mind. Frost, a room full of frost. This was what Luoya saw after waking up. The loss of control of power was terrifying, but at this time, Luoya didn't care about this because he could feel that the crown stone wasn't harming him. Instead, it was protecting him. When he understood this, the young man's face completely changed. How is this possible? In the center of the street, Luoya, whose body was surrounded by cold air, also saw the strange phenomenon. It was a white fog that connected the sky and the earth in the distance. It was as if the world was divided into two halves. It was spreading and rolling, and it was quickly approaching here. That fog is coming. The border guards keenly sensed the curse power in the fog and sounded the alarm. The curse signal flare rose into the sky and emitted a bright light and loud sound. In the colorful light, people looked up at the sky, faintly saw a blurry giant face flashing in the fog and hiding in the depths. This strange scene caused the guards to scream and cause further chaos. Under the alarm, the entire town began to wake up rapidly. More and more soldiers rushed out of their houses amidst the ear-piercing noises. Members of the Night Order began to gather with weapons in their hands. Mayor Carmen, who was fully armed, led the soldiers to the top of the city wall. The Six Disasters was a disaster that had wiped out many ancient civilizations. The number of people and the quality of their equipment had no effect on them. Even a level 1 source level master, who was comparable to a god, could not escape from their hands. It was because of this that they were terrifying. As monsters who were enemies of humans, The mutants naturally wouldn't understand the special situation today. There was only one possibility for them not to come. On the other hand, the nearby creatures also reacted. The ground was gradually being devoured, and the sky was no longer visible. Looking at the strange silver mist that was slowly advancing towards the town, everyone was filled with fear of the unknown. While breathing heavily, Carmen gave the order to attack. However, no matter if it was arrows or spells, none of them had any effect on the mist. That person is. Step back. At this moment, the youth's figure was reflected in everyone's eyes. The archers put down their arrows, and the cursemancers also stopped their curses. Standing on the city wall full of soldiers, no one dared to make a noise, because everyone felt that when Luoyu appeared, something changed. Everyone who was watching the young man held their breaths and observed the changes in front of them. They did not dare to speak, and in this silence, two colors of ice blue and dim yellow appeared on the young man's body. The sound of water vapor freezing and the sound of sand colliding was heard out of nowhere. He stepped forward, and his golden eyes burned like candlelight. He raised his head in front of the army and stared at the void. Time passed bit by bit. Luoya's curse was like a lamp burning brighter and brighter. The hazy figure of a beast formed by the frozen air began to faintly appear. An illusory figure also flashed behind the youth along with the angry roar of the wind. Under the influence of the power of the frozen earth, his expression was as calm and indifferent as if frozen in time. However, the light in his eyes told the monsters in the distance that he would never retreat. Retreat, retreat. Xia above. Long live Lord Luoya. At the highest point, the black-haired youth who was listening to the cheers of thousands of people slowly retracted his breath. The frozen earth maker and the wind summoner disappeared, and the two colors of light gradually extinguished. However, in the golden eyes, endless worry filled Luoya's eyes. Collector. This was the only person who could not show his true face in front of him in the headquarters of the Appraisal Association. He was also the nominal leader of a large-scale organization, hidden in the country under the control of the church. Just like now. Beside the candlelight at the end of the table, the collector's voice entered the ears of the man with a cold face. It seemed to come from afar, and at the same time, it was telling a terrifying truth. This is different from what you said a few years ago. In the darkness, the man's magnetic voice echoed in the space. It sounded like he was explaining and sighing at the same time. Then, why do I believe that I can succeed this time? Facing the cold face of the man at the end of the table, the collector raised his hands as if he was presenting the world in front of the man. In this era, the rhythm of fate has been disrupted. Although the existence of the Akkat family is special, they are far from invincible. Furthermore, this is your last chance. After all, the remnants of the Three Races Alliance have been stimulated by him, and they are about to break out of their cocoons and become butterflies. The words of the man in the darkness made Brian's expressionless face even more gloomy and cold. However, he had to admit that he had hit his weak spot. With the current situation in St. Mestre, if Princess Nuaire broke through again, the nobles who were watching from the sidelines would completely lean towards the alliance between Heathcrete and Akkat. Brian's long-term plan would also be ruined. The man softly called out Brian's past name and spoke of his future prediction and advice. However, these words made the cold face of the man squint his eyes. Brian looked at the end of the table and asked calmly. The man's question was abrupt and went straight to the point. The collector paused for a moment, but soon after he laughed. Perhaps that is the case, but isn't your understanding of that race too deep? You don't trust me? It's simple. It's because I have some connections with them. Yes, it was a long time ago. I see, so that's how it is. Then, I have no more questions. This is your last chance, and I accept it. The cold man turned around and left. Looking at Brian's departing figure, the collector didn't say anything else. It was only after the man's figure had completely disappeared that he muttered to himself again. In the silent room, the man looked at the untouched teacup in front of him and sighed. Then, he turned around and looked at the relief sculpture that he had obtained not long ago. Then this time, what are you going to do? From the tranquility of daily life to the sudden shock of facing the unknown, And finally surviving the crisis. The twists and turns of life made many people exhausted, but it also made many people see the current situation clearly. After the fog receded, Carmen and the other high-ranking officers on the city wall gathered together. In the middle of the crowd, the black-haired young man closed his eyes and calmed his breath. This was not a historical fragment, but the real world. In the face of the real ancient disaster, Luoya's ability could protect himself, but he couldn't protect everyone. A single 6 disasters. Aura could not make the enemy retreat. Only by summoning the Wind Summoner together with the aura of the frozen earth could it truly deter it. The young man had the crown source substance and the crown stone, but in the fortress, there was no awakened from the Akot family who could shelter him from the wind and rain. So, what would happen to them when they were attacked by the 6 disasters? Could they withstand it? In the end, why would that thing be here? Was it the Saint Heroes Society? No, they should only be able to control the egg. The almost complete 6 disasters was not something that humans could control. In other words, Mother Goddess? Knights, follow me to support Tucker Fortress. The rest of you stay behind and immediately report the situation to the Holy Capital. After the fog receded, the road was silent. Only the cold night wind whistled. The cavalry was extremely silent along the way, and the soldiers looked dignified. Luoya didn't give any more orders. Everyone was fully alert, paying attention to everything in the sky and on the ground. Why is there light? Wait, light? The young man's brain seemed to be frozen, and the reason was very simple. The sun rose in the east, but Tucker Fortress was also in the east. Chapter 419. The light of dawn. This was something Luoya shouldn't see. For the knights who rushed to the foot of the fortress after a night of attack, the fortress in front of them should be dark. The light of dawn may plate it with a layer of gold, but it would never enter people's sight. Under the light of dawn, Luoya and the knights saw an unforgettable scene. Tucker Fortress, this impregnable fortress that stood on the eastern border for hundreds of years, disappeared just like that. In front of Luoya and others, there was nothing. The giant object that connected the mountains on the left and right disappeared into thin air. The only thing left was the mountain pass that led to the endless Tucker Plain. Hidden Fog. This was the name of the monster that confronted him for a long time last night. It was also one of the 6 major disasters passed down from ancient times. There was almost no record of Hidden Fog. It was only known that it was silently activated and would completely erase everything, because everything had been swallowed up by it without a sound. 1 second memory. Once the large-scale defense curse was activated, it would affect the magic of the entire area. It was impossible for Luoya not to notice it. There were no traces of arrows or attack curses nearby. In other words, it was peaceful here last night. A creepy feeling climbed up the young man's back, and it also made him roughly guess the ability of this horrible monster, silently devouring space. Fortress, where is the fortress? The voices of the knights behind him continued to come. Some people were talking to themselves blankly, some people felt that they were in a dream, and some people's spirits began to gradually collapse in front of the incomprehensible reality. This time, Hidden Fog devoured not only the impregnable fortress that was built hundreds of years ago to its current scale, but also hundreds of thousands of elites of the theocracy stationed in it. In addition, countless materials, even the first successor of the theocracy, Prince Kaiyin, was in this fortress. Politics, economy, and military were the most important elements of a country. Almost all of them had suffered irreparable damage in this disaster. To the entire human world, the loss of Tucker Fortress had opened a door for the mutants to attack. The natural moat had become a passageway for them to pass through. Thinking of the consequences of this unprecedented upheaval, Luoya felt as if his brain was burning, and the only thing that supported him to maintain his emotions was only one thing, and that was the hope from Nuar Ire. Prince Kaiyin's letter once mentioned that Nuar Ire had improved after reading his letter. That letter was written by Luoya more than 2 months ago to report the victory of the Challenger Cup. After that letter, Luoya didn't write anything else, and that was the reason why he was so anxious to come here. The black-haired young man trembled and touched his waist. He reached out to touch the feather-like pattern on his waist. Luoya's mood finally calmed down a little. It's still here, still here. Thinking of this, the young man put his hand on his forehead and pondered for a moment. Then his body burned with a red light, and a huge skeleton suddenly rose from the ground in the explosion of the curse power. The suffocating pressure shocked everyone present. Looking back at the knights behind him who were once disciplined but were now on the verge of collapse, the black-haired young man asked in a stern voice. His golden pupils flashed, and his gaze was majestic and sharp. It made the knights who looked at him tremble, as they felt some kind of indescribable pressure. Chapter 420. Close, very close. After a day of galloping, Luoya's condition wasn't as good as he imagined. In other words, he underestimated the consumption of his energy during the confrontation with the hidden fog. After observing the battle between the three groups of aliens and the Nuwa Ire, Luoya was sure that the girl's ability was gradually improving. The scale of the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood was the most direct manifestation of this. Resonance. This was a situation that would only occur when the sacred artifact sensed the breath of its owner. In the case where Luoya didn't move, the only possibility for it to react was the appearance of the other half of the authority. The black-haired boy, who immediately understood the situation, opened his eyes slightly and began to quickly perceive the situation around him. Unfortunately, what appeared in front of him wasn't the girl he was familiar with, but a light that came from afar. 1 second, remembered the blazing ray with light and heat cut through the darkness. It was like a spear of stars that extended infinitely toward the boy. The hot wind that could burn everything rushed toward him, but Luoya couldn't react in time. The reason was very simple. It was a sudden and extreme attack that took less than 1/10 of a second. Not to mention normal humans, even extraordinaires with superior physical and mental abilities would not be able to cast spells in such a short period of time. Attacking without even saying hello, how rude. Under the strange fluctuation of the spell, the air in front of the boy suddenly became hazy and dreamy. The bright and scorching light hit Luoya's body like refraction, and fell into the darkness behind him, making a loud noise. The black-haired boy looked up at the distant sky. What he saw was the light that rose like the sun, and the girl with the wings of light spread out. Thousands of meters away, Luoya's golden pupils and the girl floating in the air looked at each other. Both of them didn't say anything. The black-haired boy felt a chill in his heart at this moment. He knew that the most terrifying thing had finally happened. Looking at Luoya on the ground, the golden-haired angel's face didn't change at all. The once blue eyes had been eroded by the divine light, and the aura on her body was far from what it was in the past. In Luoya's eyes, the girl now seemed like another person with the same face, or perhaps another god. Has she completely turned into an angel? Turning into an angel was indeed irreversible, but Kai-In said that there was a red line to turning into an angel. As long as one didn't cross it, there was still hope. So, did Nuwa cross this line? Nuwa, it's me, Luoya Akot. Do you still recognize me? Facing the sky and earth, Luoya looked up at the sky and asked with a hoarse voice. His eyes were focused on the figure in the sky. Then he saw a scene that could be considered as his salvation. The silent white flames began to burn on the girl's body. At the same time, an indescribable pressure suddenly fell on Luoya. Under the huge pressure of the god's aura, the ancient gods from the distant shore appeared one after another. However, this terrifying pressure didn't bring fear to Luoya, but surprise. Seeing the changes in the girl's body, Luoya's golden pupils suddenly shrank. Thousands of emotions surged in his heart, and for a moment he even choked up. The agitated curse power roared in the boy's body and rushed up to light up his eyes. The figures of Gulandair, Paitila, and Altacia turned into solid bodies one after another, confronting the expanding light in the sky. The ancient gods that appeared at the same time didn't look down on the world as they did in the past. Under the vast and mighty light that had occupied the sky, the giant golden snake narrowed its eyes. The white-haired witch was also expressionless, which was rare. The huge skeleton was silent, condensing its energy and power to the extreme. In the silence, the three gods all looked as if they were facing a great enemy. Nuwa was the most powerful main character in Recorder's Eye. There was no doubt about this. She was the light of judgment, the holy sword of condemnation, the child of destiny that was born after many years in this world. Now that she had almost turned into a god, she was even more dangerous. Lord Hero, I know that you want to save her, but I advise you to give up on this idea. That isn't an ordinary angel. Give it your all, or you'll die. Angels, as a race under the primordial goddess in ancient times, had always considered themselves as the messengers of God. Indeed, most races in the outside world viewed them as sacred. But in fact, as a race, just like how humans had different talents, angels also had different levels and divisions of labor. Therefore, generations of Heathcrete's heirs had great potential. The awakening of their bloodline was a journey for them to find their roots, or rather, to find the ancient angel who was the most similar to them and obtain and inherit their power. This was why every member of the Heathcrete family was different after awakening their bloodline. Angel King. The current Nuwa Iyer was, to a certain extent, a fallen god. She was also the king of a race like Paitila and the others. This was also the reason why the three ancient gods were facing a great enemy. In terms of attributes, the power of an angel was not easy to deal with. Except for Gulandair's immortality, Paitila and Altatia's powers were unable to suppress her. Boom. Give up the sky and fight in close combat? In midair, the holy beast clashed with the angel. Earth, fire and boulders blocked the girl's path of escape. In front of her was Mother Earth's giant mouth that was glowing red. But in the face of this situation, the blonde girl's expression did not change. She did not slow down or dodge. Instead, she chose to fall into the snake's mouth. The moment Nuwa Iyer swallowed, Paitila's pupils contracted. The witch below also frowned. Both gods did not understand why the enemy would voluntarily enter Mother Earth's body. Inside the giant snake, a golden light suddenly appeared. It began to flicker from one point, and then countless cracks quickly spread out. Part of the giant snake's body that covered the sky turned golden, as if it was corroded by poison. Then with a loud bang it collapsed. Not good. It could not be stopped. In the sky, the giant snake that was split into two parts let out a miserable cry and fell to the ground. The angel that broke out of the snake's body further accelerated. She spread her wings of light, and while moving forward, she released thousands of arrows of light from it. The giant's roar sounded in the night. At the critical moment, the Gulandair burst out with a strong aura of death. It swung its fist at the meteor that was rushing straight at it. Under the power of the King of Giants' fist, the blonde angel finally changed her expression, and changed her route temporarily to dodge. The sky that had already turned golden changed color when the Nuwa Iyer attacked. It rolled like breathing, constantly collecting magic elements and transforming them into the girl's power. At the end of the attack, the Gulandair resisted with its whistling bone fist. Although it was only a little each time, the Gulandair that came in contact with the angel's power was also corroded. The time that it could fight was constantly decreasing like a countdown. And after a series of changes, Luoya's curse power was almost exhausted. Under the illumination of bursts of light, the Queen of Witches floating beside Luoya turned her head and looked at the boy. For the first time, there was some sincere pleading in her words. Looking at the black-haired boy, the witch said that the future could not be changed. The Nuwa Iyer's angelization came from the King of Angels. This was something that no one had thought of before. It was an accident, and it was also her own destiny. The witch's words were rarely in line with the common values of the secular world. The logic that she said was almost irrefutable. However, after listening to Altatia's words, Luoya looked forward without saying a word. The moment such a question arose in the boy's heart, time seemed to stop flowing. A piercing sense of crisis was like a knife on his back. But when he thought of the girl's cold corpse after she died, Luoya's heart felt as if it was being torn apart. If he killed the Nuwa Iyer, Luoya could indeed live, but there was no difference between that and death. The Nuwa Iyer's angelization was his own reason, but the boy also had a reason to save her. Under the illumination of the light, the black-haired boy's tone was calm. He looked at the witch in front of him. The golden flames in his eyes were like candlelight, shining directly into people's hearts, but there was no room for doubt. Under the black-haired boy's powerful words, the source substance of the crown exploded with light and thunder. Amidst the rising curse power, the boy slowly stepped forward and calmly said the words of the promise. She's only asleep, and I will wake her up. Right now, right here. Chapter 421. Under the night sky. The white-haired witch looked at the young man who was burning the last of his curse power, and sighed expressionlessly. She knew that Luoya had made his choice. Is it the same choice again? Heh, Sir Hero is really desperate for a girl. But, how are you going to wake her up? Facing the witch's question, the black-haired young man remained silent for a moment. Then he calmly explained his plan. Following the young man's words, Altatia's scarlet eyes gradually widened. She stared at the calm young man for a long time and finally nodded slowly. Meanwhile, Luoya's curse power reached its peak and began its final eruption. Frozen earth. Under the encirclement of ice, Luoya slowly raised his hands. A huge amount of frost covered the sky and collided with the golden sky controlled by the Nuar. Two completely different forms of power began a battle. The golden and white armies clashed, creating chaos in the sky. Meanwhile, on the ground, the frost had also surrounded the blonde girl. Under Luoya's eruption, the blonde girl was surrounded by the frost and her connection with the sky was cut off. However, this didn't make her panic. Instead, her attacks became fiercer and fiercer. After the continuous confrontation, the Gulandair had reached its limit. In order to awaken the Nuar, the first thing that Luoya had to do was to get close to the girl. Whether it was physical contact or a spell, distance was the prerequisite. And the only one who could help Luoya get close to the girl was the Gulandair. Just move forward. Under the surging of his curse power, the young man with a red glow around his body walked straight toward the girl. Seeing Luoya approaching, the Angel King immediately raised her vigilance. The expanding curse power was compressed and released in her hands, transforming into a light of destruction that could destroy everything. The silent trust in the young man's heart completely ignited the battle intent of the ancient god. The huge skeleton roared at the sky. The red glow quickly gathered on one side of its body. The left side of its body was eroded by the golden glow, but the right fist of the Gulandair was as red as the sun. 100 meters. The golden-haired girl switched from offense to defense. She sensed Luoya's approach, but the cold air behind her made it impossible for her to retreat. As the aftermath of the Gulandair's attack gradually disappeared, the Angel King chose to defend herself again. The golden-haired girl stretched out the wings of light behind her, and the curse power continued to gather. However, before she could attack, the white-haired witch beside Luoya released a curse. As she muttered, Altatia pointed her finger forward. The next moment, a black butterfly appeared out of thin air with the witch's curse as bait. It quickly gathered towards the Nuar, which had the most curse energy, and began to devour her curse energy. 30 meters. As Nuar rushed forward, the cold air that had been gathering around her for a long time suddenly erupted, covering her entire body. The frozen air from the ancient calamity made her movements stiff. A layer of white frost covered her body, but it could not freeze her in a short time. However, Luoya's target was not the girl herself. Under the impact of the frozen earth, the wings of light behind Nuar quickly turned into solid ice. The angel's wings shattered and disappeared. The girl was confined to the ground like a bird with broken wings. The moment she sensed this, the cold Angel King showed emotion for the first time. Her face instantly revealed a look of panic. She had lost most of her curse power, her wings were taken away, and her body was covered in frost. However, all of this further aroused the Angel King's murderous intent, because she knew that the person in front of her was just a human. Chapter 422. In the center of the plains at night, the black-haired boy and the blonde-haired girl stood opposite each other. Their lips touched and the curse power cycled back and forth, and the girl's consciousness gradually woke up. Luoya, feeling the Nuar's violent shaking, the black-haired boy immediately reached out and covered the girl's eyes. The curse power was exhausted, his body was seriously injured, and the side effects of the crown stone were like a shadow, but Luoya knew that he must not fall down now. I'm sorry, sob, I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize, Your Highness is really a troublesome princess. As if she was afraid that the boy would leave, the blonde-haired angel's response was unprecedentedly intense. The scorching kiss was mixed with the salty taste of tears, as if the love that had been brewing for many years was constantly intertwined. Until the golden light in the sky completely dissipated, the girl's tears stopped, and a red flush appeared on her face. The two slowly separated. After looking at Luoya and getting confirmation, the teary-eyed girl suddenly pulled out her hand that was embedded in the boy's chest. Even if she had killed thousands of mutants and personally created several mountains of corpses and seas of blood, the moment she saw the boy's blood spurting out, the Nuwa still had a severe dizziness. It's okay, if it's just this kind of injury, it's okay. Just a little sleep for a while. Worried that the boy would not wake up, the Nuwa called Luoya's name, but it was a pity that it was useless. The moment the high-strung mind relaxed, an unprecedented fatigue emerged from the body. After the boy's consciousness was completely relieved, it was as if a string was cut off, and he completely fell into darkness. At the old site of Tucker Fortress, at this time, there were hundreds and thousands of torches and lamps lit in the night, and under the illumination of the lights, there were soldiers who were building fortifications overnight. Now the emergency construction was being carried out by the reinforcements from Bank Town. After protecting everyone that night, Luoya had become the de facto leader of Bank Town. The orders he left behind were immediately supported by Mayor Carmen, especially the matter of building a defensive line at the mountain pass. The black-haired youth had set up an enemy for everyone, thus strengthening his position and spirit. However, what Luoya did not expect was that his unintentional words at that time had become true as time passed. Unlike the sinners of the Appraisal Association, Brian had been stationed at Tark Fortress many times in his long life, so he knew a lot about this human fortress. Therefore, even though the collector had informed him in advance, Brian was still doubtful about the situation in the fortress. That was until he arrived at the plains. After all, according to his estimation, the soldiers who had lost their command system should be dominated by fear and chaos. The mountain pass should also be treated as a forbidden area and be deserted. However, the situation now was the opposite. The soldiers continued to rush over, and they all carried a tragic atmosphere, as if they were ready to fight to the death. On the other hand, Brian had plenty of time. When he saw the originally lifelike angel closing her eyes again, the blonde man's eyes flickered slightly, but then he no longer cared. Instead, he stared at the moving needle and carefully counted the time. This was the countdown to the peak of the awakening of Her Royal Highness's angelic bloodline. It was also the best time for Brian to kill her. As long as he made a move during this period, whether it was completely pushing her towards angelization or directly killing her, it would be his victory. Thinking back to Collector's words, Brian's gaze sharpened. Akkad's awakening might change his fate, but just like what the man said, he was far from being helpless. The power to decide the final outcome was still in Brian's hands. Let's go. Since becoming an extraordinary, the youth's physical state had already broken away from the category of ordinary humans. With the deepening of the degree of mutation, high-grade extraordinary could recover their physical state in a very short time. Even Luoya, who was one step away from him, was not much different. But today, the youth experienced something that he had not experienced for a long time. Cold. In the past, although Luoya was often troubled by side effects, he was rarely injured. The youth, who was known for his explosive and destructive power, could always destroy his opponents. He didn't need to consider whether the damage was excessive. Like this time, the situation where he was seriously injured and the other party was safe was very rare. However, the youth didn't regret it. The moment he saw the Nuwa in front of him, the youth who had just woken up was slightly stunned. There was a moment of confusion in his eyes, and he couldn't help but have a straightforward feeling in his heart. With the unique holy and otherworldly face of the angel bloodline, shell-like ears, blue eyes that seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, long and stretched eyelashes, a small and exquisite nose, and cherry-red lips that he had tasted not long ago. Luoya, whose heartbeat quickened a little, gently turned his eyes and blurted out some words to cover up his uneasiness. Feeling the chill and frost in his body, the black-haired youth couldn't help but remind her. However, hearing Luoya's words, the blonde girl didn't care. Seeing the youth wake up, the blonde angel smiled faintly, took the youth's hand and put it on her chest. "That's really a terrible disease," the blonde girl whispered softly with a sobbing tone. The hand holding Luoya trembled slightly. The black-haired youth heard her and smiled bitterly. He looked at the Nua Ayer's red eyes and recalled the girl's previous appearance. "If possible, I hope you never see it again. And in the end, you didn't follow the rules first, waking me up in that way." The black-haired youth recalled his first kiss and raised his eyebrows. The Nua Ayer slightly widened her eyes in a daze, as if she was recalling the distant past. The murmuring girl's eyes gradually blurred. She lowered her head and looked at the figure in her arms and said. Amidst the tender words, the blonde girl gently lowered her body. Looking at the tears in the Nua Ayer's eyes, Luoya's heart could no longer suppress the feelings in his heart. The embracing figure's lips once again overlapped, and the surrounding air seemed to be filled with the scorching hot feelings. At this time, the two were no longer in the dark plains, but on a bed in a room. The night wasn't over yet, and it was pitch black outside the window. Seeing this situation, Luoya slightly sighed in relief, knowing that he wasn't unconscious for too long. An outpost built during the War of the Mutants. Luoya listened to the girl's words and nodded. In his heart, he roughly knew the location of the two. As his mind gradually cleared up, Luoya's face gradually became serious. Nua Ayer's angelization wasn't a problem that could be solved once. Luoya just prevented the worst outcome last night, and gave the girl another chance. According to Kai Yin's letter, the peak of Nua Ayer's bloodline was still ongoing. As time passed, the girl's situation would probably worsen. And during this period, the most important thing was to accompany and maintain her emotional stability. Now that her father's life was unknown, Nua Ayer's heart had a flaw. Even with Luoya as an anchor to stabilize her, she might not be able to withstand the heavy wind and waves. This was like a leaky boat. Even if it wasn't capsized by the wind and waves, it would slowly sink. Nua Ayer, about Tucker Fortress, I have something to tell you. When the word Tucker Fortress was said by Luoya, the angel's body stiffened. Aware of Nua Ayer's situation, Luoya's heart ached. Hope. What you mean is 6 disasters. They were indeed terrifying monsters that violated common sense, but Luoya, who had been in contact with them for a long time, had a deep understanding of them. He understood their boundaries. After thinking for a long time, Luoya felt that the biggest possibility was to devour space, but this involved a problem. That was, although devouring space could erase everything, the person who was devoured might not die immediately. The past can't be changed, but no matter what the result is, everything is not over. So for that glimmer of hope, defeat them. I will accompany you. Chapter 423. At dawn in the Tucker Plains, the morning sun rose from the horizon, emitting a faint light. The black-haired young man looked at this ray of light and felt the same chill as yesterday. Perhaps it was even more serious. However, unlike yesterday, Luoya no longer felt uneasy because of this ray of light. After explaining to Noel the nature of the 6 disasters, and the possibility that Cain and the others still had a chance to survive, the fear in the girl's heart towards the upheaval of the Tucker Fortress was finally converted. Exploring that possibility had become the motivation for her to upgrade her bloodline. Although the hole in her heart was barely filled, it could be said that it was temporarily filled. Strong, firm, elegant, and steady. These could be said to be the most obvious labels on the Pope's princess. All along, Nua Ayer had almost never shown weakness in front of Luoya. Although the incident in Tucker Fortress this time was regrettable, it also allowed Luoya to see another side of Nua Ayer that no one knew about. It also allowed him to understand the importance of this girl to him. Thinking so, the black-haired young man gently covered his chest, endured the throbbing pain, and tried to make his expression relaxed. On the other side, the eyes of the golden-haired girl flashed a faint light without warning. At the same time, her body slightly paused, and the reaction of the curse power became a lot more restless. The sudden change made the two people in the room fall into silence for a moment. Noticing the abnormal movement of her bloodline, the girl's face changed, and Luoya's face also became serious. It was obvious that such an intense battle had just ended not long ago. This kind of recovery power. Well, sorry, I may have to leave for a while. Be careful when you fight if you can't suppress it. Hearing Luoya's assumption, the golden-haired girl couldn't help but interrupt. Looking at Nuo-Ire's determined eyes, the young man nodded slightly to express his trust. When you come back, bring some food. Yes, anything is fine. After getting injured, I also need to replenish myself. Your Highness won't let your subjects starve, right? Then it's settled. After nodding at each other, the young lady pushed open the door and flew into the distance with her wings of light in mind. On the plains, in the room where Nuo-Ire left, the black-haired boy stood by the window and watched the girl's figure slowly disappear into the horizon. His face finally showed a relieved expression. The next moment, the white-haired witch appeared out of thin air and stared at Luoya expressionlessly. Yes, indeed. Cough. Looking at the youth coughing up blood, the white-haired witch had a solemn expression. She looked out the window in the direction where the girl had left and calmly asked. In the previous battle, the girl's hand had pierced through Luoya's chest. Although the boy had anticipated this and moved his heart away, the angel's power still couldn't be avoided. This was the revenge that the Angel King left for Luoya. Nuo-Ire didn't notice it, and Luoya would never say it out loud. In the quiet room, Altacia looked at Luoya with a solemn expression that she had never seen before. Her scarlet eyes were sharp as she earnestly said. So. Time passed by slowly. Altacia's gaze became sharper. On the other side of the river, the mountainous Mother Earth and the gigantic skeleton on the plains were listening attentively, expressing their silent agreement as they waited for the youth to make a decision. No matter how one looked at it, he had already done his duty by pulling the girl back from the brink of becoming an angel. If he continued to accompany her, it would be suicidal. For days, maybe less. The black-haired boy smiled and raised his eyebrows. The white-haired witch's expression turned gloomy. But the problem was, what if she lost? Looking at the black-haired boy, Altacia's expression was as gloomy as water. Her scarlet eyes were filled with anger, and she couldn't suppress the indignation in her heart. I have to stay by her side. I'm her last anchor. The queen of the races isn't that easy to deal with. You should know this better than anyone else. More importantly, I'm waiting for someone. That's right. An enemy. Or rather, an old enemy. You can help her block the enemy, but the evolution of her bloodline is ultimately her own matter. What if she loses? What? Do as you wish. If he wanted to protect her, he had to protect her completely. Besides, there were some things that needed to be resolved. It was already noon. The sun was shining brightly above her head. The early winter in the Tark Plains wasn't too cold. There were still some plants that maintained their green color. The sun's rays made one feel warm. In the eyes of those who liked to go out, this must be a good place to have a picnic. Looking at the corpses of the mutants on the ground, the girl hugged her legs and thought expressionlessly. The arrival of the Nuo-Ire was like a calamity for the mutants. She descended like a god, giving everyone, no matter their status, the right to equality. Death. After the slaughter that wasn't painful, and even brought some joy, the girl's angelization finally came to a temporary stop. Hugging her knees, the Nuo-Ire muttered to herself. Thinking back to how she was in front of the boy, her body trembled slightly in fear. After gaining the upper hand once, the power of the Angel King had obviously become stronger. Nuo-Ire found it increasingly difficult to control herself. The fear of losing her sense of self was bone-chilling. However, what made the girl even more fearful was that the power within her body was intending to kill Luoya. Swearing in her heart, the girl glanced at the corpses all over the ground. The corpses that had just died were emitting heat due to the light. Fresh blood was gathering together, accompanied by a flock of vultures and a thick stench of blood. The bright colors eased her divinity to a certain extent, but at the same time, it made her vigilant. In fact, since the first time she came to the eastern region as a child, the Nuo-Ire found that she didn't hate killing. Sometimes, she even felt a strange sense of enjoyment and accomplishment. The girl was actually very clear about the reason for this situation. It came from her atavistic bloodline, which made her eager to fight. However, the girl didn't feel proud of it. Instead, she controlled it. No one would like a bloodthirsty madman. This was the biological instinct of humans. Although Luoya was a genius in supernatural powers, she didn't like fighting. Therefore, Nuair was tolerant and kind. Only during the birthday party when she returned from the eastern region every year would she occasionally attack the boy because of the joy in her heart. Right food. Thinking of the hand that went through the boy's chest last night, Nuair's heart would produce a phantom pain. Her expressionless face fluctuated, and the feelings in her heart urged her to do something. In the sacred white hall, a white-haired old man was sitting on the throne, silently looking forward. The death of his son, the loss of the theocracy's stronghold, and the loss of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Any one of these could easily overwhelm a person. In fact, after receiving the news for more than half an hour, the old man only did one thing, and that was to repeatedly look at the scene. The reason was very simple. It was because he was John Heathcliff. 6 calamities. Although most people in Shia didn't know about them, they were not unfamiliar to the Vatican, who had been fighting against evil cults for many years. Heathcliff, who had a good relationship with the Alcott family for a long time, had a lot of records about them. It wasn't the first time that the 6 calamities, the messengers of Mother Goddess, had appeared in the Third Era. However, they had never caused such a huge commotion before. After all, these monsters all had one thing in common, and that was that they needed a long time to grow. Therefore, it wasn't their style to expose themselves so early and alert the civilization. Pondering over this question, St. John's face grew colder and colder. He had a premonition that humanity was about to passively welcome a magnificent era. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or fate, but the young people of this generation were as bright as the stars, as if they had gathered the destiny of humanity. The collision between the two would definitely cause an intense reaction. Now that the accident happened in Tark Fortress, the power that protected the girl had almost disappeared. However, just like fate, the young people of the Alcott family should have reached her side. Then the rest was not something that others could interfere with. The white-haired old man prayed. Then he stood up and walked to the map on the side. His old eyes accurately stared at a piece of land. Eric took the lead. Chapter 424. In the Holy Capital, the white-haired old man was thinking about the general trend of the times. Thousands of miles away in the Tucker Plains, the black-haired young man was also thinking about everything under the afterglow of the setting sun. It could be seen that the girl had put in a lot of effort for this, and the black-haired young man who proposed this matter naturally did not want to be outdone. He wanted to do something himself, but he did not expect to be flatly rejected by Miss Angel on the grounds that she was injured. In desperation, the restless black-haired young man could only divert his attention, and the matter of Mother Goddess was almost naturally recalled by him. The black-haired young man could basically guarantee that in the current Shia, if he said that he was the second most watched by Mother Goddess, no one would dare to say that they were the first. He even had the confidence to wrestle with the Archbishop of the Saint Heroes Society. After all, Luoya was also an old friend of his. The young man who was a guest star of the Saint Heroes Society thought so and shook his head, finding joy in his own luck. This time in Banktown, although Luoya seemed to have seen Mother Goddess, there was basically no reaction of being watched. For this, the young man carefully analyzed this point, and thought that it should be an illusion brought by the appearance of the fog of concealment, and it should not be the real Mother Goddess. After all, if it was just an underdeveloped 6 disasters, the awakened of Akkad could still think of something. For example, in the past, Luoya's ancestor, Vincent, seemed to have chased after Mr. Darkness, but if it was Mother Goddess, at least for now, the young man had no power to fight back. Previously, Hanks once said that many people found the core of their beliefs through the experience of life and death, and thus promoted to Source Level 3. After Luoya was seriously injured this time, he vaguely had some feelings in his heart, but he was afraid that it would take some time to summarize them. Luoya? Really, what are you thinking about? You didn't respond when I called you, I thought you. Sorry, I was a little sleepy just now so I didn't hear you. Looking at the young man with an apologetic face, Nuair was silent for a moment. After her rapid breathing calmed down a little, the young girl bent down and couldn't help but confirm again. Of course. You've already healed the wound on my chest, and I've already removed my internal organs. What else can happen? After hearing Luoya's words, the Nua Iyer, who had personally treated her and even confirmed her wounds several times, could only nod hesitantly. However, looking at the smiling young man, Nua Iyer subconsciously felt that something was wrong. I'm fine. I was just thinking about something related to the mother goddess, and got a little lost in thought. After hearing Luoya's honest confession, the blonde girl heaved a sigh of relief. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the young man's neck. Leaning her head on his shoulder, she whispered softly, "Is this an order? Then I will obey your highness. It's still a little cold in the Tucker Plains at night. You're weak, so you need to be careful." After the sun went down, Luoya, who felt a little cold, covered himself with a blanket. Just as he was about to instruct Nua Iyer to wear more clothes, he suddenly frowned because he smelled something. The young man's expression changed. Seeing Luoya like this, the blonde girl blinked her eyes and panicked. She couldn't help but think of the bloody smell after her massacre. What's wrong? Is there a bloody smell? It's probably from handling food. Wait, food. It seems that Nua Iyer's first time won't be too smooth. Half an hour later, Luoya and the blonde girl sat opposite each other. On the table in front of them, a roasted chicken was lying on the plate, accompanied by some roasted vegetables. For a long time, Nua Iyer, as the princess, whether it was maintaining the relationship with the nobles or personal reputation, her performance could be described as perfect. She also excelled in art, music, and other aspects. Even in St. Freya Academy, where geniuses gathered, she was still the top student among the top students. The black-haired young man observed Nua Iyer with some curiosity in his golden eyes. In fact, this was the first time he saw his princess fail in something. But Luoya wasn't surprised. After all, the princess cooking was already very ridiculous in Xia. Not to mention an old country like the Austin Empire. Even in a highly developed and open area like Rose, noble women didn't know how to cook. The only exception was probably the country of scholars, Bulonia, where many noble women were interested in cooking desserts. But the country of scholars was in fact a country founded by a group of civilian scholars, so it was fundamentally different from others. Observing the roasted chicken that was a little black, but other than the heat, there was no problem. Luoya thought for a moment, then directly cut a piece and put it into his mouth, making the blonde girl opposite him stunned. Is that so? I think the taste is not bad. Besides, this is your first time cooking, I don't want to miss it. As a young master born in a marquis family, Luoya grew up in luxury. Nua Iyer naturally didn't believe the young man's words, but seeing Luoya not being picky about the food she made, the girl couldn't help but feel happy. Every morning they would wake up together, have breakfast together, and go to work separately. At night, they would gather together to eat and share the day's experience, then snuggle up to each other and fall asleep again. Thinking of this, the girl was in a daze. After a long time she suddenly said, "Luoya, what do you think of the Wei Dualia ancestors' choice?" Chapter 425. At the dining table, the black-haired young man was stuffing food into his mouth as he thought about how the princess learned this skill. However, after a long silence, Nua Iyer's sudden question caught him off guard. Nua Iyer's ancestor, Wei Dualia, and Luoya's ancestor, Ponte, were once teacher and student. After going through a series of hardships together, they finally fell in love with each other. However, due to their identities and many ethical issues, they couldn't become husband and wife in the end. After comparing the records of both sides, Luoya could basically confirm that these two ancestors couldn't bear it anymore and faked their deaths to escape after the theocracy entered a period of peace. However, Nua Iyer's question made him somewhat unsure of how to answer. Looking at the confused young man, the golden-haired girl pondered for a moment, and couldn't help but look forward to it. Indeed, for them, that's probably the best ending. That kind of life. Do you like it? Facing Nua Iyer's expectant gaze, Luoya couldn't help but stare blankly at everything in front of him in silence. For ordinary people it was a daily life, But for the girls it was a dream. In fact, even during the holidays, Miss Angel had a lot of things to do. Being friendly with the nobles in the palace, being roped in by the local nobles, and many other matters in the Vatican consumed a lot of Wuxia's energy. As for the future, the prophecy of destruction, if it was only a fantasy that existed in Wilhelmina's words before, then now, everything was slowly becoming a reality. For the girls, the personal line crisis in Eye of the Recorder was like a shadow that followed them closely. Wuxia's experience this time was a warning. If you want to say that I like it, then I definitely like it. However, Wei Duolia's ancestor did that on the premise that the country was stable and the tide of the era was peaceful. I'm afraid this is already very difficult for us now. It's okay to experience it, but let's forget about faking our deaths. Otherwise, the theocracy will be in chaos. As a subject, what I should do now is to advise my lord. I don't want to be known as a traitor. But if that day really comes, I want to be with you. Miss Angel couldn't help but widen her eyes at the unexpected attack. She didn't know how to respond to the blunt words. Her lips trembled, and her cheeks began to blush. After a moment of silence, she couldn't help but ask. I don't agree, but that's from the standpoint of the government. In the end, the sudden disappearance of the emperor is a fatuous ruler. However, a self-indulgent ruler is actually nothing. Like I said, it was the government's position before, not my own. It doesn't matter if you're a muddle-headed and tyrannical ruler, a tyrannical tyrant, or a mediocre ruler. I don't care. What I need to do is to stay by your side, just like right now. Looking into the young man's golden eyes, the golden-haired angel was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she felt her eyes heating up. She could only turn her head to the side to hide it. In this world, there are people who judge things as they are, and there are people who entrust their trust to others. Neither is right or wrong. I just chose the latter because I believe in Wuxia Heathcliff. You speak as if you're a puppy following behind its owner. Can I put the chains on you? Tisk, how stubborn. Speaking of which, it's almost time. Is it just the two of us? The black-haired young man who was thinking about the date narrowed his eyes and looked at the girl opposite him with a warm smile. Chapter 426. Under the curtain of the night, the black-haired young man stood calmly in front of the huge palace complex. He silently scanned his surroundings as the bell rang in the distance. Looking at the magnificent and familiar buildings that he had visited several times, Wuxia walked forward. He walked through the wide and majestic city gate, walked through the empty square, walked through the long corridor hung with exquisite ornaments, and finally arrived in front of the familiar door. Along with the sound of the door opening and closing, light shone through the gap in the door, and gradually spread to both sides of the black-haired young man. Everything in the room once again appeared in the young man's eyes. Not long ago, this was the place where the black-haired young man and the white-haired witch met for the first time. In this dark place where flowers bloomed, the two of them fought with their wits as their weapons. They both won and lost, joined hands once again and used this as an opportunity to sign a contract. At this moment, the golden color had already spread between the throne and gradually extended from the corner of the wall. In fact, during the process of entering here, Wuxia had already seen this familiar radiance. When this land was completely dominated by the golden color, the witch would lose control of this place and her connection with the black-haired young man would be severed. The result was obvious. Wuxia had already predicted this result, but even so, looking at the witch on the throne, the young man was filled with guilt. On the high platform, the white-haired witch gently stood up. Her scarlet eyes flickered and her face showed some displeasure, just like a young girl quarreling with her lover. No, I just feel that I have wronged you. Hearing the black-haired young man's words, Altacia fell into silence while Wuxia revealed an apologetic expression. In ancient times, the witch race had an extremely special status and authority compared to other races. It was a race that all living beings feared. Even the angels who considered themselves as messengers of God didn't dare to easily offend them. As the queen of the witch race, Altacia had an extremely high self-esteem. On the throne, hearing Wuxia's words, the white-haired witch's expression calmed down a little. She looked at the young man and the anger in her heart gradually extinguished. After a long time, she looked to the side and said, What are you referring to?" On the throne. A rare smile appeared on Altatia's face. She raised a finger and said with bright eyes, "I see. Should I say that you haven't forgotten your original intentions? The angelic corruption won't stop here. It will continue to worsen after I die. When you encounter your enemy, the corruption should have reached its final stage. By then, I'm afraid that only the Gulandair, whose attributes conflict with the angels the most, will be able to move. I'm afraid your enemy isn't as simple as you think. I can sense a chaotic aura that is full of inauspiciousness. Based on the results of the divination, it is not optimistic either. As the Queen of Witches, who was synonymous with calamity in the ancient times, anything that could make Altatia feel ominous would definitely be extraordinary. Witches' divination abilities were second only to the goddess of fates. Indeed. Looking at the calm and slightly helpless young man below, Altatia's face showed a pleasant smile. She narrowed her eyes slightly, and her eyes were full of expectations. The small and flexible tongue licked her lips gently. The white-haired witch stroked her cheek with her hand and said with narrowed eyes, revealing an inexplicable desire. Luoya was unmoved by this, but he was grateful to the witch's support from the bottom of his heart. Hee, if you want to get something, you have to pay something. For Transcended, it is the same whether it is ancient times or now. Depression and joy are also contradictory. I always face this situation. Sir Hero is really evil. The black-haired young man raised the corner of his mouth and shook his head. He then looked at the witch above and asked seriously with a teasing smile, "Oh? Do you have anything you want?" The smiling Luoya whispered the curse vessel he wanted. The white-haired witch blinked and slowly raised the corner of her mouth. Altatia, who heard Luoya's request, smiled happily. After a long time, the Queen of Witches, who completed the commission, looked at the young man and said goodbye with a smile. "Yes, in order to save the princess, I can only say goodbye temporarily, Your Majesty." The white-haired witch smiled happily, bowed her head slightly and lifted her skirt. At the same time, everything around the young man began to blur and distort. In the witch's heartfelt wish, the young man smiled and nodded. The next moment, Luoya's consciousness fell into darkness and returned to the real world. Before dawn, beside the sleeping black-haired young man, Nuair Heathcliff was experiencing unprecedented torture and contradiction. Glancing at Luoya, who trusted him completely and slept with his back to the girl, Nuair's eyes flashed with a painful look. His hand holding the blanket tightened, and he began to hesitate about the decision he made before. Making such a decision was naturally inconsistent with the feelings and wishes in the girl's heart, but for Nuair, this was the result of no choice, and the opportunity was the moment when the girl lost control in the evening. Nuair couldn't remember the location of the base. Obviously, as a transcended whose bodily functions and thinking speed were far superior to ordinary people, and as a person who received military training from a young age, Nuair shouldn't and couldn't forget her starting point. More importantly, there was a person in the base. Just like how people might forget the shop they used to frequent, no one would forget their home. Nuair couldn't forget the location of the person close to her. In fact, she really did forget, so there was only one possibility. At that time, the girl understood that the erosion of angelification had probably reached the third stage, which had never been recorded in Heathcliff's records for thousands of years. It was no longer a complete replacement, but a partial contest of consciousness. From the third stage onwards, the deterioration of the girl's condition became much more concealed. She might be herself one moment, but in the next moment, she might have lost something important, and the consequences would also affect the people around her. After the bloody battle with the Angel King, Luoya's combat skills, which were her companions, had been limited by the unique erosion power of angels. The young man had also been seriously injured once, and his condition was unprecedentedly bad. Vaguely, Nuair felt that the young man was hiding something. The plains at night were cold and dark, and the whistling of the night wind continued. The girl knew that after crossing the gate, she would once again face everything alone, and she might never be able to return. But when she thought that this was the only way to protect the person she loved to the greatest extent, Nua Ayer's heart became strong. Going out at night? I think it's better to tell me. In the room, Luo Ye's calm voice sounded, and the Nua Ayer in front of the door widened her eyes and froze. After a slight panic, the blonde girl hurriedly adjusted her mood and responded with a smile. The black-haired young man did not comment on the answer given by Nua Ayer. After a moment of silence, Luo Ye asked again, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. It's almost dawn, so I want to make breakfast. I'll be back soon. Muttering the blonde girl's words, Luo Ye slowly stood up and touched her chest. She could not help but feel an inexplicable sense of relief. Using the erosion that was like a deadly toxin as a detector, this was the reason why Luo Ye could detect Nua Ayer's condition in advance. At this time, in the chest that was once penetrated, an unprecedented pain was spreading, and the passage to Altacia was completely closed. Nua Ayer, let me see your eyes. The black-haired young man stood up and slowly approached. His request made the girl who had her back facing him tremble slightly, not knowing what to do. The blonde girl did not move, and Luo Ye did not say anything. Silence pervaded between the two. After a long time, the princess who gritted her teeth finally turned her head and looked at the young man with a calm expression. Separate? Am I bothering you? You are now seriously injured. Even if the Angel King appears again, you won't be able to fight anymore. You are no longer of much help to me. Thank you for everything you have done for me, but now I think it's better for you to return to the rear. It's safer there. Hearing Nua Ayer's words, the black-haired young man stopped in his tracks. However, what she did not expect was that after a short silence, Luo Ye raised her head, and there was no anger in her golden eyes. Instead, there was warmth and calmness. Wait. This is a gift? The black-haired young man sighed slightly. Looking at the surprised Nua Ayer, he smiled and sent a blessing. Nua Ayer, happy birthday. Chapter 427. Princess Nua Ayer. Heathcliff's birthday was a major event in the Saint Maester theocracy. Every year, she was responsible for contacting the local nobles and consolidating the royal family's power. It could be said that it was a political gathering, and when it wasn't celebrated as a gathering, it seemed to have lost its meaning. However, Luo Ye didn't forget about it in such a difficult period. This also showed that the young man didn't treat this day as a social tool like most people. Instead, he sincerely remembered it in his heart. Wait. I'm happy that you remembered my birthday. But what is this chain? Ha! The black-haired young man looked at the chain that he obtained from the Witch Queen and explained. However, the hidden meaning in his words made the blonde girl's body stiffen. Yes, in the last battle, that guy left some power in my body. 1 second, remember. The moment she learned about the young man's condition, Nua Ayer couldn't help but feel slightly dizzy. No one in the world knew better than her what the remaining power of the angel meant. Because of this, just as Luo Ye expected, the young girl's reaction was extremely strong. An order? Then I should obey it. But sorry, I refuse to do so this time. Hearing the young man's rare refusal, the blonde girl was anxious, but there was nothing she could do. Although Nua Ayer was the one who Luo Ye swore loyalty to, the young girl hadn't inherited the throne yet, so she didn't have the authority to enforce orders. It was impossible to let Nua Ayer leave alone. Whether it was the Angel King or the vicious hands of the Eric family, the young girl couldn't fight against them alone. In order to completely change the young girl's fate, Luo Ye had to convince her. This was the first time Luo Ye showed an unimaginable strength in front of Nua Ayer. The sudden change surprised the young girl, and her blue eyes met with the young man's golden pupils. It was a calmness that was willing to give up everything. I know you're worried about me, so you want me to leave. But I also want to tell you that I've never wanted to die. I'm accompanying you so that you can obtain victory, so that the future we want can be realized. Impossible because you are Nua Ayer Heathcliff. Facing the young lady's question, the black-haired youth resolutely replied. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation in his words. He caressed the young lady's cheek and looked straight into her eyes. You are the only one with the atavistic bloodline in the Heathcrete family in 1,000 years. You are the princess of the theocracy of Saint Maester, and the brightest star in the history of the Vatican. You are kind, upright, and tenacious. You can even change the fate of people like me, the King of Angels. He may have been great once, but the times have changed. The dragons have disappeared without a trace, and the angels are no longer around. The remnants of him may be able to stop you for a while, but you will eventually defeat him. And I'm very sure of that. Looking at the young man who was speaking, Nua Iyer was speechless. In Luoya's shining golden eyes, the young lady didn't see a hint of a joke. On the contrary, she saw a serious and calm expression. So, a person can trust others to this extent? At this moment, Noelle suddenly felt something heavy pressing down on her, but it was not the feeling of a burden. Instead, it was as stable and reassuring as a sea-stabilizing needle. It was a kind of joy that suppressed the anxiety and uncertainty in her heart. Because you are my lord and the most important person to me, I dare to say that I know your future better than anyone else in the world. You sound like a prophet. But indeed, I am your lord, and also your protector. As someone who should protect you, I can't let you down. Now that things have come to this, you can't leave even if you want to. In fact, after saving Nua Iyer, Luoya always felt that something was missing from the young lady. She was no longer as confident and strong as before. But now, after Luoya's encouragement, the young lady angel's heart was once again whole. And this was his biggest goal. How troublesome. But this should be enough. The unexpected situation made Luoya reveal a surprised expression. The young man who lost his balance because of the pull could only reach out his hand to support himself on the door. Amidst the dull sound, Luoya raised his head and saw the young lady's smiling face right in front of him. Realizing that something was wrong, the young man's face stiffened. The blonde young lady raised her hand and looked at the holy white shackles and chains with a smile. Wait, you said you wanted the chains, right? I also have handcuffs on my hands. Besides, don't you like them? You hateful rebellious minister. It was best to give a birthday gift in line with the other party's preferences. This was a common sense no matter which world it was in. But just as the right thing was not necessarily right, the commonly accepted common sense would sometimes fail. The failure this time was a good proof. This was probably Luoya's intuition. Luoya asked Altacia to create this curse vessel. The original intention was to give it as a gift, but it was more for the young lady's bloodline promotion. However, such a reasonable and far-sighted item was used in a way that it shouldn't be used because of the user. On the lawn, the black-haired young man, who was wrapped in a circle of chains, sat in front of the blonde young lady, looking at the sky and silently regretting his mistake. On the other side, Nua Iyer held one end of the chain and held a spoon to persuade him. From the moment the contract lock used angel power as a medium, Luoya, whose angel power in his body was far less than the young lady, was at a disadvantage. The subsequent facts also proved that Nua Iyer could almost completely control the chain. Next, she could do whatever she wanted. Luoya, you really don't want to eat. I don't want to eat. Then untie the chain. The young lady smiled happily and refused Luoya's request. Then she leaned down and lifted her hair, revealing her white neck and delicate collarbone. She put her face close to the young man's ear and whispered softly, I refuse. Wait. What are you going to do? Looking at Nua Iyer's white and slender body, Luoya's brain couldn't help but heat up. His heart beat violently, and his breathing quickened. As a man, his male instincts began to awaken, making the young man's conditioned reflexively feel that something bad was going to happen. The angel who was wholly in front of others was now flushed red, and her eyes were like silk. That unique temperament, the feeling of holy and evil mixed together, was like a poison with an unimaginable charm. Especially with her identity as the successor of the Holy See, there was an additional layer of forbidden temptation. Facing such a Nua Iyer, Luoya was utterly defeated. On the other side, the blonde young lady's foot had already lightly stepped on the young man's thigh. No, this isn't the problem. Wait. I'll eat. Aren't you going to feed me? I'll take it, so stop. Luoya, who felt that he would explode if stepped on, hurriedly stopped the punishment that was about to go out of control. After losing the reason to punish, the blonde young lady pondered for a moment, and after regaining her senses, she retracted her slender leg. Immediately after, another round of losing control. The angel who couldn't control herself grabbed onto the end of the chain, not allowing Luoya to retreat. The young man also completely stopped resisting, and after a long time of entanglement, the two of them separated slightly while panting. It's just the appetizer. After experiencing 2 accidents, Luoya finally had a meal. This time, the Nuwa Iyer didn't cross the boundary, and instead gently helped the young man fill his stomach. This was because the young lady knew that if the two of them continued, it would be difficult to take back the spilt water. There was no problem with the doctrine that the life born from the union with the person in love was a gift from the goddess. However, for Luoya and Nuwa Iyer, it was still a little too early for them to reach adulthood after only 1 year. More importantly, the current situation of the royal family was more important. Tomorrow will be the final moment, right? After lunch on the lawn, the black-haired young man asked about the time. The Nuwa Iyer felt the bloodline in her body and nodded lightly. The two of them leaned against each other, silently listening to each other's heartbeats. The black-haired young man gazed towards the west, feeling the call from the source substance channel. His flashing golden eyes seemed to pierce through space and landed on the enemies who were rushing over from afar. His gaze was as sharp as a blade as he brandished his weapon. Tomorrow was the day where their fates intersected. Chapter 428. Little guy, you're here. In the valley, a black-haired young man stood on a rock, looking up at the golden-haired woman he hadn't seen for a long time. After clearing his mind, he nodded gently and turned his head to observe the surroundings. He looked at the familiar place that he had visited several times, and his eyes were filled with pity. But now, the once dark valley no longer existed, and the continuous mountains were cut off. Everything had been eroded by the golden light, and most of Paytila's true form was gradually disintegrating as part of the earth. How is it? You haven't seen me in this form for a long time, right? Do you miss it? You can say that. Although my true form is a world serpent, it's not convenient for me to be in that form in front of Shia. That's why I have a human form. Facing Paytila, Luoya acted as if he was accompanying an elder, and there wasn't a trace of impatience in his expression. In fact, to the young man, Paytila was different from Altacia, who was like a rival, and Gulandair, who was like a close friend. Paytila was more like a mother to him. 1 second to remember. Luoya cherished this unique relationship very much, and it was because of this that the young man found it hard to bear when he saw Paytila's true form disintegrating. The Earth Mother also noticed this, and to a certain extent, the conversation between the two was also a form of enlightenment. My strength is close to Shiya's, so my compatibility with angels is better. I didn't expect to be at a disadvantage because of this, but fortunately, I managed to block it. I won't be able to accompany you in the next battle, but that stinky bone can still move. He's very strong, and it shouldn't be a problem if you guys work together. Yes, I understand. You're very smart. You must have thought of what I said a long time ago, but I couldn't help but say it again. Otherwise, I wouldn't be at ease. I don't agree with you saving that angel girl, but I can understand. But I still think that elf girl is better. But it's okay. With me around, no matter how many wives you have in the future, you can take care of them. Sensing the sudden change in the topic, the young man's face stiffened, and he didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the Earth Mother didn't pursue the matter. After a few more words of advice, Paytila stopped talking, and Luoya knew that time was almost up. After thinking for a moment, the young man took the initiative to step forward and hugged Earth Mother's body. After a short daze, the golden-haired woman returned the hug. Yes, I will. Not long after his consciousness, he returned to reality. The moment he opened his eyes, Roha was in a warm room. The valley and the mother goddess were far away from him. They were replaced by the morning sun, and the blonde angel who hasn't woken up yet. Chapter 429. Under the setting sun. The black-haired young man and the man in the distance looked at each other with killing intent between them. The appearance of the old enemy represented the end of fate. This was the conclusion of Brian, who had lived for a long time. On the other side, the black-haired young man obviously had the same thought. Brian didn't hide anything this time, no matter if it was his face or aura. The reason was very simple, because this operation was a desperate gamble. Luoya's question didn't need to be answered, but the young man's calmness was somewhat out of Brian's expectation. And what was even more strange was that looking at Brian, who came to kill him, Luoya's eyes didn't have any hatred or disgust. Instead, there was some inexplicable sorrow and sorrow. The things that you should have held on to are worn away too quickly, and the things that you should have given up are not worn away. Ambition and desire are always expanding. Everything that happened 200 years ago still hasn't come to an end. To you, this is probably a very long time. Ferd Eric. Hearing the young man said his former name, Luoya's pupils suddenly contracted. Brian's gaze was like an arrow, staring at the young man's body. His expressionless face finally had a fluctuation for the first time. 200 years had passed. Not to mention his contemporaries, even his younger generation had mostly left this world. And in this long time, Brian's face had changed several times. Luoya caught, as a young man who wasn't even 20 years old. It was impossible for him to know his identity. Looking at the black-haired young man, Brian asked with a gloomy face. An ominous premonition emerged in his heart. Hearing his question, Luoya remained silent. After a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "But unfortunately, time flies. Things remain the same, but people have changed. The fierce tiger has disappeared and the night has turned into a cold, venomous snake." Facing Brian's question, the black-haired young man replied with a heavy voice. The middle-aged man's face finally changed. The shock in his heart made the middle-aged man's heart waver. He understood that his plan wouldn't go smoothly. But then the killing intent in his eyes became stronger. "It doesn't matter, he hasn't lost yet. I didn't expect you to know my identity in advance. But unfortunately, fate isn't on your side. The appearance of the primordial monsters changed everything. Your plan will be disrupted." Quantity? Although the outcome of a battle between extraordinaires was not decided by numbers, one against many would still increase the difficulty. Furthermore, Luoya's source rank was not considered high. However, what puzzled Brian was that the young man remained calm after hearing his words. He just looked up at the sky and spoke in a gentle and calm voice. A faint smile appeared on the young man's face, causing Brian to frown involuntarily. However, before he could issue an order, a drastic change had already occurred that left everyone dumbfounded. Sturdy and broad, the shield was dyed with a layer of blood red by the light. Fine and heavy, it was a sharp blade that ordinary transcendence could not wield. The sound of clashing armor, and the sound of footsteps echoed. On the fluttering flag, the symbol of the eye of the flame of Akate seemed to penetrate the hearts of the people. Of course, for the cultists other than Brian, the other flag was more attention-grabbing and terrifying. Chapter 430. On the plains under the setting sun. Holy light and blood rain entangled in the sky. The stench of burning earth filled the air. A battle that would protect the future and decide the turning point of humanity's fate entered its climax without anyone noticing. On the other side, the crazy cultists and the rebellious noble families represented chaos. Killing everyone and dragging the human world into a chaotic world was their wish. In their eyes, human lives were worthless. Once they succeeded, there would be no more pursuit and escape. Killing would be as natural as breathing in the world. Survival would be completely determined by the strong and the weak. In Luoya's previous life there was a saying, king against king, general against general. However, in reality, this kind of situation occurred most often on a chessboard and not on a real battlefield. As for Luoya, as a person who was obviously inferior to Brian in the source level, it was obviously inappropriate for him to fight. Therefore, when the battle began, the head of the tribunal, Hanks, stood beside Luoya and was prepared to fight with one of the 5 noble families. However, what he did not expect was that Luoya's choice was not to retreat, but to face the attack. Amidst the clashing of swords and screams, The black-haired young man looked ahead and said calmly. The red-haired man frowned. This time, my mission is to protect your safety. As the head of the tribunal, killing cultists is my duty, and you must live. Perhaps sensing the doubts of the people around him, the black-haired young man looked ahead and said calmly, the fate of our enemies is important. Although our fated enemies are important, we need victory more than anything else. The black-haired young man looked into the distance, his golden pupils carrying a certain conviction, as if he had seen something that others could not. At the same time, floating gray particles began to spread across Brian's body. Destruction and chaos appeared out of thin air in the heart, like an invisible hand shaking people's faith. The gray gas shrouded Brian's body, causing all the soldiers near him to retreat in fear. The cultists also fled in fear. The heavy and oppressive atmosphere made it difficult for people to breathe until a bloody light appeared behind everyone. Luoya Akit's golden pupils lit up as if they were burning. He looked across half the battlefield and stared at the blonde man. Both of their faces were cold and calm. In their eyes, there was nothing but each other and boiling murderous intent. The bloody light continued to push forward, followed by the relief and joy of the soldiers on their side. Witnessing the scene of the two forces pressing against each other, Hank's expression changed abruptly. Whether he admitted it or not, it was a fact that Brian Eric had obtained an unimaginable power that might have come from the gods. And just as Luoya said, only the gods could defeat the gods. After realizing this, the soldiers around Luoya had no choice but to retreat. The silent head of the tribunal led the soldiers to the other enemies, wanting to eliminate the others before helping Luoya. And on Brian's side, there was no one around the blonde man. At this moment, the strange gray fog surrounding Brian's body suddenly thickened at a speed visible to the naked eye. The rising gray fog connected to the sky, releasing an ominous aura. The thick death aura was visible to the naked eye. Even the cultists were shocked when they saw it. Seeing such an unimaginable and incomprehensible scene, even the tribunal, who had been fighting the cultists for many years, turned pale. At this moment, everyone finally understood what the gray fog around Brian's body was made of. However, this terrifying scene may have frightened others, but the black-haired young man did not cower. Not to mention fighting, just looking up at him would make one feel insignificant. Looking at him for even a little longer would cause severe pain. Unobservable, untouchable. There was no need for words. These had been firmly engraved in everyone's hearts. Instead of killing all the enemies, the best way to end this war was to defeat them. This was the consensus between Luoya and Brian. Apart from that, the blonde man also had a reminder from another person. This wasn't because he was afraid of the enemy, nor was it because he didn't have confidence in himself, but it was a cold fact. Whether it was his ability or his body, he was greatly weakened. If it was fueled from the time of the Gemini War, Roha would have some confidence, but now the situation has changed. Limbs, internal organs, and various other body parts were constantly squirming together. This was what Luoya saw in Brian's eyes. Even the tribunal, who was used to seeing life and death, would be horrified to see such a scene. However, the black-haired young man was not frightened because he already knew that Brian's body must have some secrets. After the Gemini War, the Eric family had fallen. Ferd Eric's death could not be faked, and it could not be faked. The ability to resurrect a person from the dead was something that even a cult could not do. Only a god could do that. Brian Eric. This person's death was witnessed by Luoya, and it was Brian who killed him to appease the public's anger. So, what did it mean for his soul to appear in this disgusting fog? A battle between extraordinaries was not only a contest of strength, but also a contest of intellect. The moment Luoya deduced this, he understood that the chaotic battlefield was perhaps the best place for Brian to display his abilities. The moment Brian pulled out the blade, his entire body's spirit seemed to have concentrated on a single point. The ability of his bloodline began to operate. The curse power penetrated into his flesh and blood, giving him explosive power that was far beyond the usual. The explosive acceleration only lasted for a split second. Brian's body moved from stillness to movement without any preparation. Countless vengeful spirits were entwined around him as he dashed towards the youth. However, the black-haired youth's face showed no signs of panic as he faced the sword that was pointed at him. Boom! Dust and gravel rose into the sky, obscuring vision. Countless cracks extended in all directions along the Gulandayer's attack. The people who were in the middle of the battle were affected by the shockwave and had to stop temporarily. The cultists, heretics, and the soldiers of the Inquisition could not help but look at the center of the battlefield. In their eyes, this attack seemed to be able to determine the outcome. It was a sword made of gray smoke, with a strong and ominous aura. The squirming gray smoke on the sword seemed to have a life of its own. It rushed towards the man who was seriously injured because he blocked the attack. At that moment, there was a wail in the air. A moment later, it gradually subsided as the man recovered from his injuries. The consumable type was the most troublesome enemy for Luoya now. The erosion of the angelic power in his chest was ongoing at every moment. Luoya's condition would worsen over time. He was now only at source level 4, but Brian seemed to have turned into an immortal. The only thing he could do now was to go all out. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to have become a cage. Thick cold air gushed out, with the power to freeze everything. The stars and moon in the sky disappeared. The rapidly falling temperature stained the armor of the soldiers with white frost. The blood of the cultists was also frozen. In the middle of the mist, Gurandal's arms extended backward. The rolling crimson curses shone brightly. Under the illumination of the light, the gigantic skeleton looked like an ancient demon god. Its fist was as unstoppable as a mountain. In the mix of red light and cold air, Brian's expression changed drastically. He roared and used all his strength to release layers of gray smoke. The rapidly expanding fog turned into a palm that seemed to come from hell. It met the giant's attack head-on. However, the Gulandayer was unmoved. And the facts proved everything. Countless souls surged out from the gray fog and charged upwards. However, under the fist of the giant, all of them were like mantises trying to stop a chariot. The expanding fog burst like a balloon. The giant's arm continued to move forward, accompanied by the sound of exploding souls. Until the end of the attack, the golden-haired man was sent flying back into the darkness like a bullet amidst the crisp sound of the blade breaking. Looking at the blonde man in the sky, Luoya's golden pupils suddenly flashed. He raised his hand, and the white cold air penetrated the sky like a ray of light. It then turned into a white palm, wrapped the blonde man's body, and smashed him down to the plain below. In the loud noise, Brian, who was covered in frost, fell heavily to the ground. Luoya's figure shot out like lightning and chased after the blonde man on the ground. On the ground in the distance, the blonde man's frozen body seemed to have shattered. Well done. A familiar voice of praise sounded in Brian's ears. The next moment, the young man suddenly stopped in his tracks. Chapter 431. Amidst the freezing air that covered the sky, the black-haired young man's body was like an arrow that was released from a bow. Behind him, the heresy army raised their swords and cheered. The judges' morale was also greatly boosted. The battle between the two didn't last long, but in this short period of time, Luoya and Brian displayed spells that were far beyond anyone's imagination. Especially the power of the Gulandayer, which deeply shocked everyone present. Was Brian Eric, or Ferd Eric, such a weak enemy? Luoya didn't have Paytila's blessing on him, which meant that he was only at the 4th level of source rank. Although he and the Gulandayer used all their strength to attack, and the frozen Earthmaker had almost no defensive means, under normal circumstances, there would be some unexpected situations when facing a 2nd-level source rank expert, let alone Brian. Thinking of this, the young man didn't dare to be careless. He stopped and stretched out his hands again. Without any allies nearby, the freezing air was finally released by Luoya. The white air in the sky squeezed up and down, as if converging into a giant mouth that could swallow everything, and pounced on the man on the ground. However, this time, Luoya miscalculated. On the empty plains, a third person's voice suddenly sounded. A man in a long robe that was formed from gray fog appeared beside Brian. The moment the black-haired youth saw him, the pupils of the golden-haired man suddenly shrank, while the golden-haired man on the ground had a calm expression. The collector. was the nickname given to the leader of the organization by the members of the Appraisal Association. No one knew his identity, and no one had seen his face. For more than 100 years, Brian had only met him in that dark room. He seemed to be omniscient, but he also seemed to be hiding from something. The blood in his body seemed to boil with the power of the curse. The source material of the crown trembled uncontrollably as if it felt hostility. At this moment, the crown stone emitted a violent light. Under the full activation, the ancient beast seemed to have been revived by Luo Ye's hands. The freezing air was suddenly activated, and it turned into a beam of light that cut through the night sky. Just like that, the touch of frigid earth continued to move forward as if nothing could stop it. Everything seemed to end with this attack. But what the young man didn't expect was that the gray figure that suddenly appeared didn't dodge. Instead, it faced the freezing air head-on. Ever since it became Luo Ye's skill, whether it was against a god or a human, the freezing air that had never failed seemed to have failed this time. The light attack didn't freeze the enemy, but instead retreated to the sides. In the dark space in the distance, the man's main body looked at the young man in the image and stretched out his hand. However, at the moment when the two sides touched, the source of the crown in Roha's body suddenly changed. The intense trembling stopped inexplicably, and the shining light gradually dimmed. The black-haired boy's eyes widened as he felt a strange feeling. I remember this place. The candlelight was still shining in the darkness, but a hand had reached out from the darkness. It appeared silently, but it seemed like it had always been there. As the hand approached the candlelight, a strong sense of uneasiness appeared in the young man's heart. This thought appeared almost instinctively in Luo Ye's heart, but he couldn't move. His body couldn't feel, and his consciousness was hazy. Everything told Luo Ye that in this dark space, he was just a bystander. At this moment, Luo Ye suddenly felt a bone-piercing cold, as if the disappearance of the candlelight had taken away his warmth. The flickering candlelight seemed to be struggling, but the boundless darkness became heavier and heavier. Finally, everything returned to normal. It was also at this moment that the black-haired young man's consciousness returned to his body, accompanied by the sudden stop of his blood. How is this possible? Chapter 432. On the plains, Brian looked at the huge skeleton walking past him. In the dark space, the man with a blurry face also turned around and prepared to leave. From their point of view, they had achieved their goal, and there was no need to pay attention to the gradually blurring youth. When the freezing of his bloodline and source substance stopped, he lost the protection of the gods and was hit by Brian's gray fog. His fate was already sealed. In fact, Luo Ye's figure had indeed begun to dissipate and was no longer moving. However, what the two of them didn't know was that the youth's consciousness still existed at this moment. Something had to be done. But the problem was, how could the crown, the king's blood, be interfered with? Death was scary, but what was even scarier was the result after death. Without his protection, the heresy army and the judges who could not fight against the gods would be completely annihilated. And behind everyone, the princess that the young man swore to protect would also die. What you lack is the core of your faith. Remember it in a second. Active mutation. This was the foundation of stepping into this darkness. Only by finding the core of oneself and reactivating the power of the Akit family would Luo Ye have a chance of survival. Hanks was a devout believer, so he used his faith as the core and practiced it in his life. Then, did Luo Ye have something to support him as well? It was in the dark palace. At the end of the building, a man with blonde hair and blue eyes stood. His handsome face was like a sculpture in art, but there was also a unique rebellious and untamed air about him. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and flashing lightning illuminated his figure, allowing the youth to see his face clearly. The moment he saw Vader, Luo Ye widened his eyes in surprise. He didn't understand why he saw his figure. Such a question flashed through the youth's mind, but he immediately denied it. This was because the moment he saw Vader, a scorching heat suddenly appeared in his body, as if it was resisting the power that was dragging him into the darkness. It was also at this moment that Luo Ye suddenly felt as if he had grasped something crucial. I see. It's because of a certain similarity. Prince Vader was Luo Ye's former enemy. The two of them were very different in terms of personality, ideals, and many other aspects. They were even contradictory. However, these two people who were as incompatible as fire and water had a part in common, and that was resistance. Luoya, you're rebelling against fate. The holy capital was engulfed in the flames of war. The majestic ocean, the despairing and chaotic academy, the all-devouring calamity was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in front of him. Even the strongest human beings were trying to kill him. The Messiah, the Mother Goddess, each and every one of the highest existences wanted to kill him. However, just like the ancestors of the Akut family, even though the fate of death followed him like a shadow, it was unable to suppress his head. Rebelling and changing fate, this is my core. Boundless power began to converge and pulsate. In the dark space, it was as if a candle flame that was about to be extinguished suddenly flickered despite the absence of wind. The flickering candle flame burned brighter and brighter, finally bursting out with an intense radiance. The black-haired youth strode forward, reached out his hand and grabbed the palm in the darkness, as if he was grabbing the throat of fate. Under the illumination of the light, the black-haired youth's eyes were like candlelight. He looked directly at the figure in the darkness, his voice flat but unquestionable. It's time for you to return what you've taken away. Chapter 433. Luoya Akut was defeated. Just a minute ago, the black-haired boy was still chasing after Brian, who was sent flying by the giant. He planned to launch a final attack, but in just a few seconds, everything had taken a turn for the worse. Looking at the gray figure that disappeared after the attack and Brian who stood up, everyone understood that this was a conspiracy. Brian and the others' target was the black-haired boy from the beginning, and it turned out that they had succeeded. Everything happened so suddenly that even the pagans did not have time to react. Cynthia, who was holding a shield, was stiff. Rodney, who was waving a long sword, also stopped. The white-haired one looked into the distance, as if he still could not believe what he had seen. Brian had a powerful divine power, which was difficult for the pagans and the Inquisition to fight against. As long as Luoya died, there would be no more suspense in this battle. In the eyes of the red-haired man, Luoya was indeed on the verge of death. His power was sealed by the strange gray mist figure, and his body was gradually being erased over time. Even so, the boy still had a chance. Recalling the boy who came all the way to the border with him, Hank's eyes gradually calmed down. He had seen too many young talents, but he felt that only Luoya would not die here. This was his confidence in his vision. Before he could advance, he must buy time. Crack! At this moment, the collector suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. Everything around him instantly dimmed, and the flickering candlelight appeared beside him. Under the candlelight, the black-haired boy had already grabbed his wrist. The cold spell extended along his body, and his cold eyes were mixed with murderous intent. In an instant, the man suddenly withdrew his arm, and the cold air had covered half of his body. In the dark space, the boy had also taken back his bloodline and glory. To be able to capture his body in that world, it meant that the young awakened had found his own essence, the root of his beliefs. No one in the Holy Church could extinguish his candlelight, and the king's blood would be completely activated. The man in the room stared at the shining light on the medium in silence. In the distant plains, in Brian's blue eyes, incomprehensible things were also emerging. Kings standing with swords, ferocious beasts, holy angels and dragons spreading their wings, and ancient creatures flashed past one by one. Gods and demons also turned into fleeting clouds as the pressure kept increasing. Finally, a glowing figure appeared. The moment he appeared, even the most ferocious villains trembled like children who had done something wrong. Devout believers called out his name. The moment he saw the scene in the sky, the man's body and mind trembled, and the gray mist also scattered in fear. Hanks looked at the strange scene, and hurriedly lowered his head, and his eyes were full of shock. The ancient bloodline awakened and displayed its ancient glory. His frozen body began to burn. The black-haired youth looked up at the sky. The shining figure reached out a warm hand to touch his head. As the origin substance of the crown trembled, He seemed to see the goddess in the light smiling warmly at him. You have received Xia's blessing. Chapter 434. At the mountain range at the end of the Tark Plains, a violent earthquake stopped the soldiers who were repairing the fortifications. The people who came and went crouched down to stabilize themselves. The demons in the mountains were restless, and flocks of birds were circling the sky. Under the support of the crimson lightning and the shard of the crown, the mighty power of the gods once again shone upon the world after so many years. Under the concentrated attack of Granadar's full power, the evil god that was like a gray fog was defeated. The black slash that wiped out everything was also burned and shattered inch by inch under the attack of the lightning. Countless remnant souls were reduced to dust, and the golden-haired man who was the instigator of all this also met his end. The moment he sighed in his heart, the lightning struck the man in the face. The red light that drowned everything also wrapped him in it. The blade in his hand was completely shattered, and he could no longer feel his body. However, under the bombardment of the red lightning, Brian's face was not filled with pain and resentment, but a moment of absent-mindedness. Your Highness, boom. The soldiers put their shields in front of them and lowered their bodies. The judges also prostrated themselves on the ground. The cultists who sensed that the situation was not good jumped up and tried to escape. However, the red lightning that fell from the sky became the knell of death, burning all the villains who were not protected by the group's skills into ashes. 1 second to remember. The aftermath of the battle between the two swept across the plains and lasted for a long time. When the wind gradually subsided, the light disappeared, and the lightning and dark clouds were far away. Luoya opened his eyes again and looked at his own body. At this time, the plains had turned into sand under the impact of the divine power. And the golden-haired man was lying in the sand. The powerful aura of the man had disappeared. His body that had survived a long time was now full of holes. However, after losing the evil god and the souls, there was nothing left to replenish him. In the face of the red lightning, Brian didn't try to avoid it. He didn't even try to fight back. He just silently endured it, as if it wasn't unacceptable for him to fall. When Roja saw the man's eyes, he understood everything. Red lightning roar. That's His Highness' skill. You are. I'm not him. A short answer, followed by a sigh of disappointment after a silence. The golden-haired man's eyes flashed with disappointment, and Luoya continued. I see. You don't seem to mind that I defeated him? His Highness doesn't hold grudges. It's an acknowledgement that he gave you the skill. I'm his knight. His acknowledgement is the principle that I need to follow. Perhaps it's my destiny to die in your hands. Looking at the man who was burning his life to the end, Luoya responded indifferently. There was no pity in his heart. He only sighed at the complexity and changeability of human nature. Luoya didn't know why Brian chose to be resurrected. Perhaps it was to avenge his old master, perhaps it was because of the regret of his family's decline, or perhaps it was because of his persistence in success. But no matter what, the young man knew that he had lost his original heart, and his journey had come to an end. Nua Iyer is actually his descendant. The moment the young man said those words, the golden-haired man opened his eyes slightly and looked at the young man in front of him. In the haze, he seemed to see the figure of a golden-haired knight holding a long sword. So that's how it is. Did knight lose to knight? Be careful of that person. He knows you very well. Who is he? Do you know his identity? The drifting dust was blown away by the night wind. Under the dusky sky, Brian ended his life full of twists and turns. The old enemy of the Akkad family for more than 100 years was gone. The burning flames of karmic retribution slowly extinguished, and an era came to an end. Luoya didn't want to think too deeply about Brian's good deeds and evil deeds. To the young man, Brian was just one of the many enemies. Perhaps if Vader didn't die, Brian could become a loyal subordinate as Felder. But that was nothing more than a wild guess. The black-haired young man sighed. The man's bones were burned to ashes, and the tiger flag was burned as well. After more than 100 years, everything was no longer the same as before. After saying goodbye, the young man turned around and walked away in the sandstorm. The battle between Luoya and Brian wasn't long or short, but the outcome and the process could be described as shocking. On the plains, after experiencing the aftermath of the Gulandayers' attack and witnessing the death of Brian, the vice president of the Appraisal Association, the cultists who followed Luoya here were in a complete panic. Those who tried to escape were killed on the spot by the heresy army and the judges, and most of them surrendered immediately. Whether it was the appearance of Shiya's phantom in the sky, or the power displayed by the Gulandayer, all of them dealt a heavy blow to the cultist spirits. After the successive attacks, many of them had completely lost their will to fight. When they saw Luoya return, their legs trembled and they collapsed on the ground. Looking at Luoya, who had broken through to level 3 of the source rank, a rare smile appeared on Hank's face. The judges, who were serious in speech and manner, also showed respect. As someone who could draw out Shiya's phantom, Luoya's status in the hearts of these devout Shiya believers rose rapidly. In terms of ability, the young man had proven himself with his battle achievements. Looks like you've found the root of your beliefs. Very good. Count Hanks, what you said gave me a lot of inspiration. That's why I was able to break through successfully. Thank you. The serious man calmly rejected this sudden achievement, making Luoya not know whether to laugh or cry. After a brief exchange, the black-haired young man turned his head and looked into the depths of the plains. Hanks also fell into silence. Both of them knew that it was not over yet. But of course, Luoya would not let that happen, and he had already made preparations for it. Well, it's my job to deal with criminals. It was the holy city floating in the clouds, emitting a holy white light. Clouds and mist lingered around it, and the sun shone on it, making people feel warm just by looking at it. Tranquility and peace flowed in their hearts like a warm current. It was the legendary City of Angels, a magnificent building built by the gods in ancient times. It floated in the clouds, symbolizing the authority of the messengers of God, and also represented the glory bestowed by Shiya. The moment she arrived, solemn music sounded in her ears. The people coming and going stopped in their tracks and bowed to her with a smile. Under the respectful escort of the crowd, the blonde girl walked all the way. She walked past the majestic city tower and crossed one door after another. After a wide corridor, there was a meeting hall with 7 chairs. 7 archangels. The 7 archangels walked past one by one, but after shaking their heads in denial, their expressions became more and more respectful. They clustered around the blonde girl and smiled as they led her deeper into the city. The moment Nua Iyer saw the woman on the throne, there was a sudden restlessness in her body. A strong sense of intimacy broke out in her body, and when she saw the blonde girl, the holy and beautiful woman on the throne's solemn expression thawed. She stood up and smiled as she walked forward, looking at the queen walking towards her. Nua Iyer's mind gradually went blank. The restlessness of her blood made her emotional, and the strong sense of intimacy seemed to tell her that the person in front of her was in existence that she could completely trust. In the depths of her heart, a strange feeling began to rise. The emotions in the girl's heart were in a mess, and on the other side, the Holy Queen extended her hand and smiled in invitation. After hesitating for a moment, Nua Iyer finally responded. But the moment she extended her hand, the girl's eyes involuntarily stared at her wrist, and an inexplicable question emerged in her heart. There was something missing here. Chapter 435. Inside the Holy Palace, the gentle light shone in all directions. Under the throne, the attendants and guards bowed their heads respectfully. The 7 archangels surrounded the girl with a smile. The king with a kind face reached out her hand, waiting for the girl to respond. However, under everyone's gaze, the blonde girl looked at her wrist in front of her in a daze. Such a question arose in Nua Iyer's heart. The surging blood cooled down slightly, and the surging emotions in her heart stopped slightly. The girl surrounded by everyone suddenly frowned. She looked at her smooth wrist and inexplicably felt that something was wrong. She seemed to have forgotten something important. Thinking about this problem, the girl who suddenly felt a headache withdrew her hand and held her forehead. A few inexplicable images suddenly flashed in her mind. However, before she could think of anything, her shoulder was suddenly held. The girl who suddenly woke up raised her head, and found that it was the blonde woman wearing a crown in front of her. She still maintained a smile on her face. She didn't seem to care about Nuwa Ayer's rudeness. Beside her, the handsome and beautiful angels didn't show any abnormalities. They didn't seem to see the girl's expression and slight bitterness. This time, the beautiful woman didn't wait any longer. Instead, she smiled and took the initiative to hold the young girl's hand, leading her forward. The 7 archangels followed her step by step. When they reached the platform, the young girl stopped in her tracks. Meanwhile, more and more angels poured out from both sides. She seemed to have experienced such a scene before. An indescribable sense of dissonance emerged in her heart, making the girl begin to be vigilant. The music and singing also slowly stopped at this time. The 7 archangels stepped forward one by one under the respectful gaze of the guests. They held the blonde girl with both hands and blessed her one by one. Under the layers of light, Nuwa Ayer's body seemed to be gushing with endless energy. After the blessings of the 7 archangels, the blonde girl turned around and looked at the woman on the throne behind her. At this time, the majestic king had a gratified smile on her face. She stood up and walked to the girl. Under everyone's gaze, she gently took off the crown on her head. Looking at the crown in the woman's hand, the blood in the girl's body surged violently. The holy white crown seemed to have a strange magic in her eyes at this moment, making her want to own it. She intuitively felt that at the moment of coronation, she would get unparalleled power and power. Holy white. Wait, the curse vessel of this color, I remember. The holy white curse vessel was indeed what she cherished and wanted to own. However, it was not this. Click. Looks like you don't need my help. Of course, who do you think I am? You hurt the most important person to me, and you still dare to appear in front of me as if nothing happened? My bloodline may indeed be inherited from you, but my power was not bestowed upon me by you. In order to reappear in the world, you had to succumb to the tyranny of divinity. What right do you have to crown me? The trembling crown floated in the air, and everything around it seemed to lose its color. The holiness of the huge palace faded away, and the light in the shining space was extinguished. Glory and power shrank towards the crown, and finally landed gently on the girl's palms. At this moment, there was a sudden uproar in the vast space. The angel kings resisted the pressure and stepped forward to stop them. The 7 archangels were also shocked. However, all the obstacles were useless. The holy white crown had become the best endorsement, proving to everyone where honor and power belonged. Chapter 436. After a soul-stirring night, the black-haired young man and the golden-haired girl had both overcome their own difficulties and defeated their fated enemies. When they returned to the familiar wooden house, the two of them looked at each other and sighed with emotion. You've advanced to source level 3? So it's like this. I thought I could suppress you with my strength, but now it's another starting line? But it's better to be safe than sorry. Congratulations on your successful advancement. The black-haired boy shook his head helplessly. This incident gave him a new understanding of the so-called Chosen One. After breaking through the bloodline and source level, Nuwa Ayer's combat power had increased exponentially. In fact, even Luoya wouldn't dare to say he could win against her. After recognizing the strength of Nuwa Ayer, the black-haired boy was relieved. However, a question flashed through the boy's mind. Luoya vaguely remembered that Nuwa Ayer's bloodline didn't seem to be this strong in the recorder's eye. The princess was stronger than expected. This was undoubtedly a good thing, but the boy didn't have a clue as to the reason for all this. The biggest factor affecting Nuwa Ayer was Luoya himself, but the boy didn't do anything in this regard. Feeling the dense reaction of the curse, Luoya and Nuwa Ayer tidied up their clothes and walked out of the room. When the two stepped out of the door, the blonde princess appeared in front of everyone in one piece. Uncontrollable cheers came from the crowd. After the princess was safe, the Saint Maester theocracy would regain its stability. The Vatican would once again play its role. The warriors who died in battle could finally rest in peace. All their efforts would be rewarded. Before this, Luoya's team had a fierce battle with the cultists of the Appraisal Association. Many warriors died in this battle. Nuwa Ayer's face was heavy when she heard the news. However, as the head of the Inquisition, Hanks was very calm. Luo Ye's expression was also normal. After witnessing the strength of the enemy, the casualties now were the best result. However, all of this was in the past. With the death of Brian and the annihilation of his henchmen, the Appraisal Association had suffered a devastating blow. Without the cover provided by the Eric family, such a large cult could no longer hide in the theocracy. Roja didn't say this out of pity, and he didn't have any sympathy. In fact, the Eric family wouldn't change because of Brian's words. But he felt that as a descendant of Vader, Noelle had the right to know the fate of the man who followed her ancestor. And even when he died, she couldn't forget him. You don't seem to sympathize with him? The golden-haired girl sighed and raised her head. She looked at the boy beside her and asked, "Because of separation, I need to remember. But I won't. I will always be by your side." Hearing the boy's calm reply, the blonde girl's eyes widened slightly. Her cheeks flushed and her lips trembled. In the next moment, the holy white chain suddenly appeared in the girl's hand. The angel girl blushed slightly and dragged the boy in front of her. She stared into his eyes and said with embarrassment and anger, "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."